Have you ever thought about who the most powerful Sith in Star Wars really is? Like, who would actually win in a fight? Who had the smartest plan? And who just completely failed at being a Sith in every possible way? In this video, we're going through the most iconic Sith Lords by ranking them based on power, legacy, and sheer mastery of the dark side. So grab a snack, get comfortable, and settle in. This one's going to be a fun trip through thousands of years of dark side history. And drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from. It's always awesome seeing where Star Wars fans are tuning in from across the galaxy. And if you enjoy this type of content, consider subscribing. Now, let's begin. Let's just get this out of the way. If we're ranking Sith from best to worst, Sidious is sitting on the top. There's no debate here. I mean, the guy actually won. That's rare in Star Wars. Most Sith blow up, fall down a shaft, or get stabbed by their apprentice. But Sidious, he pulled off the full villain checklist. Before the lightning hands and the evil cackling, Sidious started off like the sneakiest chess player you've ever seen. Quiet guy, smooth voice, never raises his tone. You'd never guess he was planning to destroy the Jedi over his morning coffee. He was patient, like terrifyingly patient. The guy's entire plan took decades to unfold. It was like watching someone set up the world's most complicated game of dominoes. Except the dominoes are people, governments, armies, and, entire civilizations. Back when he was still Palpatine, just a senator from Naboo, with that silky voice and permanent half-smile, nobody suspected a thing. While everyone else was busy playing checkers, he was building a second game board under the table and rigging it from the start. And the Jedi, they were completely out of their depth. The Jedi had lightsabers, temples, thousands of years of tradition, and zero clue what was happening right under their noses. Yoda and Mace Windu were sitting around like, something feels off. Yeah, you think. The guy literally had a Sith office across the street. Even Count Dooku, who was already dark side adjacent at this point, didn't fully grasp the scale of what was going on. Sidious wasn't just running the Republic, he was also behind the entire separatist movement. You know how insane that is? He built both sides of a galactic war from scratch, just so he could cause enough chaos to grab emergency powers and rewrite the rules of the whole galaxy. And then comes the real mic drop. Order 66. And Sidious did it all from a comfy chair. What's extra creepy is how he wrapped it all in this perfect PR campaign. After the massacre, he gets up in front of the Senate and delivers that the Jedi tried to overthrow the Republic speech. And what do people do? They applaud. They literally cheer for the beginning of the Empire. He convinced the entire galaxy that he was the hero in all this. Meanwhile, he's standing there, practically glowing with the dark side, and nobody bats an eye. He looked like a burnt raisin with anger issues, and people were like, yeah, this guy seems reasonable, but don't let the politics and monologues fool you. This guy was lethal in the Force. People like to talk about how Yoda was the Jedi Master of Masters. Well, Sidious went toe-to-toe with him and basically won. And while Yoda escaped, you could tell even he knew, yeah, we're cooked. That wasn't a fight to stop Sidious. That was a desperate attempt to slow him down, and it still didn't work. And it wasn't just that fight. Go watch Sidious against Maul and Savage. Dude took them both out like it was light sparring. No sweat, just elegant, deadly movements and the occasional, you have been replaced. Like, bro, imagine getting fired mid-duel. Plus, the guy was a master manipulator of people's minds. He could cloud the entire Jedi Council's senses. The Force itself was being bent around him. That's not just power, that's weird, high-level dark sorcery. We're talking about a man who twisted prophecy, used the Force to hide himself in plain sight, and even learned how to stop death itself. That's not a Sith, that's a nightmare with a Senate badge. And yeah, you can say what you want about how tragic Anakin's story was, but Sidious was behind every bad day the guy ever had. Found him when he was young, whispered poison into his ear for years, made him question everything, and then finally broke him by dangling Padme's life like a carrot on a stick. He didn't just beat Anakin, he rewrote him. By the time Anakin becomes Vader, he's so broken that he doesn't even realize he's serving the same guy who caused all his pain in the first place. Sidious pulled off the most messed up emotional con job in the galaxy. He took the Chosen One and turned him into a space Darth Enforcer. And the best part is, this still isn't the end of the story. Sidious doesn't stop at winning, he keeps going. We're not even into the cloning madness yet, or the weird post-Return of the Jedi stuff, or the whole somehow Palpatine returned situation that turned the sequel trilogy into a meme factory. That's all still to come. The thing about Sidious is that even when you think he's dead, he's still causing problems. He's like the galaxy's most toxic ex. It doesn't matter how long it's been, he always finds a way to ruin your life from a distance. So now we're in the post-Order 66 era. The Jedi are toast. Sidious walks into the Senate and casually announces that the Republic is being rebranded like it's a startup getting a new logo. And everyone cheers. They're into it. Not one guy stood up and went, "Hey, is anyone else a little concerned that this dude is looking extra crispy and kind of evil today?" And from that point on, the galaxy becomes his playground. Political control, a loyal army of clone troopers ready to follow any command. The only other Force user who could challenge him? That guy's now walking around in a portable life support system, calling himself Darth Vader. Yeah, Sidious is thriving. But here's the twist most people don't appreciate. Sidious hated governing. He didn't care about the day-to-day running of the galaxy. The man wasn't sitting there worried about road taxes or planetary trade disputes. He wanted power, not paperwork. So what does he do? He creates the Empire, slaps a terrifying logo on it, and starts ruling from the shadows again. He builds this whole authoritarian structure just so he can sit back and focus on his real passion, being the galaxy's most evil science nerd. Because now he's in full experiment mode. He's done playing politics. He starts diving into weird Sith projects, secret observatories, ancient rituals, Force temples, and of course, cloning. Oh, and while he's doing all that, he still manages to keep Vader on a tight leash, which is a whole other achievement by itself. I mean, think about it. Anakin Skywalker was supposed to be the chosen one, but Sidious completely broke him. Not just physically, emotionally, mentally, and spiritually. The guy who once said, "I will bring peace to the galaxy," is now just stomping around in black armor doing his master's bidding. He didn't just gain a powerful apprentice, he ruined a symbol of hope and turned him into a weapon of fear. And the worst part, Vader was loyal. That's how deep the manipulation ran. Sidious convinced the most powerful Jedi in history that all of this, the war, the fall of the Republic, Padme's death, was somehow necessary. He twisted the knife so well that Vader just accepted it. That's not just Sith skill, that's top-tier gaslighting. And while Vader's out there hunting survivors and spreading fear, Sidious is kicking back, building planet killers. The Death Star wasn't just about military dominance, it was a message. He wanted people to know, I can erase your entire world before lunch. It's fear-based government at its finest. Not exactly subtle, but very effective. You know who else he scared? His own people. The guy didn't trust anyone. Not his governors, not his admirals, not even Vader sometimes. Everyone was just a pawn. He kept power by making sure no one ever felt safe. It's like he was running the entire galaxy on anxiety and fear. Very healthy management style. But what really takes it over the top is how many layers deep he went with his contingency plans. Most villains have like one backup plan, maybe two. Sidious had dozens. Secret bases, coded commands, underground labs, ancient Sith rituals. He was preparing for every outcome, even death. The man had a whole posthumous empire in a box ready to launch the moment he got vaporized. That's concerning. And if you think he mellowed out as he got older, nope, he got weirder. Instead of slowing down, he just got more obsessed with immortality, with power, with figuring out how to bend the Force itself to his will. He wasn't just ruling the galaxy, he was trying to outsmart death, using cloning, Force rituals, and who knows what buried in some Sith basement. And let's be honest, he wasn't sharing any of this with Vader. If anything, he was already looking for the next model. That's why he kept poking around for other apprentices, other Force sensitives, Inquisitors, and secret experiments. Vader was powerful, yeah, but Sidious saw him as a project with an expiration date. Cold, but that's the kind of boss he was. Thanks for the years of service, here's your lava scar bonus. Don't let the airlock hit you on the way out. And despite all this control, Sidious still couldn't resist micromanaging. Like, the guy personally flew to the second Death Star to oversee construction. That's the level of paranoid we're dealing with. He literally built the first one, lost it because he let a bunch of teenagers near an exhaust port and said, "Alright, I'll build another, but this time, I'm watching you do it." That overconfidence, that's where the cracks start showing. Sidious had everything. Control, fear, a terrifying apprentice, planet-killing weapons, and like 600 different contingency plans in case someone sneezed wrong in the Senate. The guy was basically untouchable. Until he wasn't. And it's kind of poetic, really. After all the scheming, all the manipulation, all the empire building, Sidious gets thrown down a shaft by a guy he thought was completely broken. And that moment, it should have been the end. That's the kind of clean ending people write movies around. The evil tyrant is defeated, his empire falls, balance returns to the Force. Beautiful. Wrapped with a bow? But no, because of course not. Sidious, being the absolute maniac he is, had already planned for that exact moment years ago. He had this whole, just in case I get murdered by my own apprentice, folder tucked away. Most people prepare for retirement. Sidious was out here, preparing for spontaneous vaporization. So, he clones himself. Kinda. I mean, calling it cloning is generous. What he actually does is toss his soul into a half-finished, janky body like he's playing Force Pokemon. The body can barely handle it. He looks like someone microwaved a raisin. His fingers are falling off. He's held together by dark side duct tape and sheer hatred. And yet, he's back, sort of. And where is he chilling now? You know, the creepy Sith planet no one knew existed, buried in the unknown regions? Of course he had a backup lair, with cultists, and a fleet of Star Destroyers that all randomly have Death Star cannons strapped to the bottom like some messed up Lego mod. And here's where things get weird, like even by Sith standards. Because Sidious isn't just sitting around sipping tea in exile, he's full-on crafting a new plan. He starts growing clones, building a fan club of dark side fanatics, and trying to figure out how to possess someone stronger. And yes, that's where Rey comes in. He wants her body. It's a weird sentence, but that's literally the plot. He's her grandfather somehow. Don't even ask, we're not unpacking that family tree today. And he wants to take over her body and return to his full power. Dude's been playing Galaxy Conquest on hard mode for decades, and he still thinks, yeah, let me just hijack my granddaughter. That's plan A. Meanwhile, above Exegol, the sky is falling. Resistance fighters are showing up. Lightning storms everywhere. It's chaos. But Sidious is in his element. He's got his Sith Eternal fan club, chanting in a basement. He's jacked into life support like some kind of evil USB drive, and he's throwing force lightning at the entire sky. That's how dramatic he's gotten. But even with all that, he loses. And this time, it looks like he's finally gone. And yeah, you could say it's a ridiculous end, that the clone stuff was messy, that bringing him back was a bit of a reach. But you know what? It fits. Because Sidious was never just a villain. You don't just kill him by stabbing him. You have to outlast him, outthink him, burn him out of every shadow he ever hid in. That's what makes him the greatest Sith to ever live, and also the most exhausting. Even when he's gone, you're still cleaning up after him. His influence lasts decades. The Empire, the First Order, the Final Order, it's always somehow got Palpatine's fingerprints all over it. Guy's basically the dark side's customer service rep for eternity. Still have questions? Here's a clone. And you know what's kind of tragic? For all his intelligence, his power, his manipulation, the guy was never satisfied. Not once. He ruled the galaxy, twice, and he still died chasing more. He couldn't enjoy his victory, couldn't rest, couldn't trust anyone. He was always hungry, always paranoid, always reaching for some next level that didn't even exist. That's not power, that's obsession. So yeah, Darth Sidious, top of the list. Not because he was the strongest with a lightsaber, not because he had the coolest robes, but because he broke the entire galaxy and then kept breaking it from beyond the grave. He's the reason the Jedi fell, the reason the Empire rose, the reason everything that came after was just people trying to clean up the mess he made. So let's talk about Darth Vitiate, aka Tenebrous, the Sith Emperor, that guy who really didn't know when to stop. If Sidious was the galaxy's most dangerous politician, he was the Force's equivalent of an unkillable parasite who just kept swapping names like someone with a burner phone collection. The man ruled for over 1,000 years. I mean literally. He sat on a throne, kept switching bodies, and ran empires across centuries, while everyone else turned to dust. You could start a family tree, and by the time your great-great-great-grandkids were born, Vitiate would still be out there, doing his evil routine like it was day one. But here's the thing. He wasn't just some cranky old Sith that lived a long time. This guy devoured planets. Whole planets. That's not a metaphor either. He actually stood on Nathema, ripped the life out of every living thing on the surface, and absorbed it. You visit that place after what he did, and the Force is just silent, like it got scared and left the building. That alone tells you we're not dealing with your average Sith Lord. This guy wasn't playing politics. He wasn't manipulating councils, or running double lives like Sidious. He went full cosmic horror, and decided that control wasn't enough. He wanted everything, all the energy, souls and knowledge. And that drive, it started young. Tenebrous was already flexing his dark side powers as a kid. I'm not even exaggerating. He was choking people out with the Force before he could read. By the time he was a teenager, he made his own father suffer for days just for existing, and he wasn't doing it for revenge or survival. He just liked it. That's when you know something's off. The Sith have had a lot of messed up origin stories. Eventually, he gets noticed by Marka Ragnos, the big name in ancient Sith circles, and gets crowned as a true Lord of the Sith. He disappears, fakes humility for a while, then comes back with a plan so insane, so over the top, that it sounds like bad fiction until you realise he pulled it off. The ritual of Nathema? It was mass extinction as a snack. He sacrificed an entire Sith world and drained the life essence from everything to turn himself into this immortal being. The cost? Millions of lives. The gain? He becomes something else entirely. Not just a Sith Lord, but this weird floating anomaly of dark side energy wrapped in human form. And once he had that power locked in, he wasn't content to just sit around meditating or running temples. He rebuilt the Sith Empire from scratch, just vanished into the unknown regions, reappeared centuries later with a whole new army, fresh ideology, and a long-term plan to wipe out the Republic. The dude literally had two empires running in different corners of the galaxy at the same time. On one hand, you had the Sith Empire fighting the Republic out in the open. On the other, Vitiate was secretly manipulating everything back on Dromund Kaas, like some kind of force-powered chess AI. And here's the kicker. Even his own people didn't really know what he was. Most Sith Lords at least pretend to be relatable. You can talk to them, argue with them, maybe even stab them if you're lucky. Vitiate, he was more like a force tornado in a human costume. He didn't talk, he declared. He didn't teach, he consumed. The Sith Council under him was just a bunch of seat fillers. He didn't need allies. He needed followers who understood that their lives were just spare batteries in his grand plan. What really separates him from other Sith is how far he was willing to go beyond the Sith code. Most dark side users want power, sure, but they also want things like admiration, legacy, revenge, or at least a cool castle. Vitiate didn't care about any of that. His goal wasn't ruling the galaxy, it was erasing it, starting over, wiping out all life and building something new with only himself at the center. And that's where the cracks start to show. Because all that power, all that control, it came at a cost. He couldn't stay in one body forever. He had to keep transferring his essence. Every time he moved to a new host, he lost a little something. Stability, memory, control. So what does he do? He splits himself, literally. Creates separate versions of his consciousness, like Valkorion and Valkorion's kids, who are a whole mess by themselves, and spreads across different timelines and planets like a corrupted backup file. So now he's not just a Sith Emperor anymore. He becomes Valkorion, ruler of the Eternal Empire. Same guy, new skin, new family even. And the crazy part is, he's actually kinda good at it. For a while. As Valkorion, he plays this totally different role. Calm, composed, slow-talking philosopher king with a cape that screams, "I drink space wine and stare into the abyss." He builds this ultra-advanced empire, gives it a sleek sci-fi aesthetic, creates an army of droids called the Eternal Fleet. And this time, he doesn't even bother with Sith ideology. No Sith code, no dark side lectures. He just rules like some kind of divine space monarch. A lot of people don't even realize he's force sensitive. And while he's smiling and giving speeches about order and destiny, he's still working on the same endgame. Strip the galaxy of life and rebuild it from nothing with only himself in charge. Dude's just wearing a fancier mask this time. He's still the same soul-hoarding monster underneath. And then comes the family. Because of course this guy, who thinks emotions are for peasants and people are fuel, decides it'd be a great idea to have kids. Why? Who knows? Probably just to see if they'd be useful tools. Or maybe he was bored. Either way, Valkorion ends up with 2 sons and a daughter, Arkan, Thexan, and Vaylin. Sounds normal enough until you look at how he raised them. He trains them to be warriors from the moment they can walk. Gives them impossible tests, brutal expectations, and basically no affection. One of his kids gets twisted so hard by the Force, she can barely control her mind. Another turns into a vengeful warlord, and the third doesn't even make it out of the tutorial phase alive. What's wild is that even while being the worst dad in the galaxy, Valkorion is still admired by millions. His people legit worship him. To them, he's this perfect, unaging, wise ruler who brought peace and technology and stability. Meanwhile, he's sitting on a throne in silence, daydreaming about how to devour the Force itself and hit cosmic reset on all living things. And if you're wondering what happened to the other Vitiate body, the one still pretending to be the Sith Emperor, yeah, he kept that going too. For a while, he was basically managing two empires at the same time. Eventually, his two personas start slipping. His plans start overlapping. People start noticing he's everywhere and nowhere. And then, you guessed it, he gets killed again. When Valkorian's physical body is destroyed, does he vanish? Of course not. He just jumps into someone else's head, literally. His spirit latches onto the Outlander, the main player character from Star Wars, the Old Republic, and starts haunting them like a very judgmental Force ghost who won't shut up. He gives cryptic advice, makes threats, sometimes offers help, always with that smug voice like he knows he's still playing 4D chess. And you know what's crazy? Even then, even trapped in someone else's brain, he's still dangerous. He still manages to manipulate people, drive wedges between factions, twist minds, and shape the war from the shadows. His influence is everywhere. He's the voice in your head, the shadow in the Force, the bug in the system. But there's a catch, because splitting your soul into multiple versions, bouncing between bodies, and trying to outlive death for 1,000 years, it starts to fall apart. He's not stable anymore. His different versions start getting pulled in different directions. He loses control. For the first time in his absurdly long life, he's vulnerable. And when people finally start pushing back, his kids, the Outlander, even old enemies, they don't just beat him with lightsabers. They start cutting through him, through his illusions, through his lies. They confront who he really is, a broken, obsessed monster who thought he could become a god by hollowing out everything else. By the time you reach the final chapter of Vitiate's life, everything's starting to fall apart. The man who once ran two entire empires from the shadows is now clinging to consciousness inside someone else's mind. And the thing is, it's not even that surprising. You kind of see it coming. He spent his whole existence stretching himself thinner and thinner, splitting his soul, body hopping, pretending to be different people, chasing immortality like it was the only thing worth living for. And eventually, that kind of thing catches up. He got what he wanted, endless life. But the price, he became a glitch, a system error with a crown. So he's stuck in the Outlander's head, still trying to make moves like he's the puppet master he used to be. He tries to offer advice, manipulate outcomes, drop cryptic one-liners like "the Force has no true center," or "this body will be my final vessel." And you can tell he thinks he's still running the show. But really, he's just noise in the background, a haunting echo, the boss who's been fired but won't leave the building. What finally ends him isn't some lightsaber duel or Force nuke, it's closure. People finally stop fearing him, stop listening, and slowly, all the pieces of him that were scattered, Sith Emperor, Valkorian, Tenebrous, they all start collapsing in on themselves. His former apprentices, his messed up children, the enemies he underestimated, they all stop playing his game. And when the Outlander confronts him at last, you realize something wild. Vitiate has never been weaker, because for all his power, he has nothing real left. And then, he's gone. That's it. The guy who devoured entire planets fades out like a bad dream. And it's weirdly fitting. He was always trying to become something more than human, but in the process, he lost anything remotely human about himself. No friendships, no loyalty, not even real ambition after a point, just hunger. That's the difference between him and someone like Sidious. Sidious enjoyed the game. He played people, built empires, broke institutions. It was never just about staying alive, it was about winning. Vitiate, on the other hand, never really seemed to enjoy anything. He wasn't interested in ruling the galaxy as a place with people. He just wanted a clean slate, a blank universe where only he existed. Like a child flipping the board because he didn't like how the pieces were arranged. And that's exactly why he's not at the very top of the Sith ranking. Was he powerful? Absolutely. In some ways, he might have been the most powerful Force user in the whole Star Wars timeline. We're talking about a guy who drained an entire world, survived 1,000 years, lived through multiple bodies, and warped the Force in ways no one else could. On a raw power level, he's top tier. But being a great Sith Lord isn't just about Force lightning and creepy rituals. It's about strategy, impact, influence, the legacy you leave. And in that department, he fumbled hard. His Sith Empire, it collapsed. Twice. His eternal empire, burned down by his own kids and enemies. His followers either betrayed him, feared him, or misunderstood what he even was. He didn't train a legendary apprentice. He didn't create a lasting doctrine. The galaxy didn't change because of him. It just barely survived him. Even his death didn't really ripple out the way Sidious's did. When Sidious died, the first time, it marked the end of the Empire. So, when you look at the full picture, you get it. Vitiate was terrifying, brilliant, a monster in every sense of the word, but he was also cold, distant, and ultimately disconnected from the very galaxy he tried to control. He wanted to reshape the universe in his image, but in the end, there wasn't an image. There was just emptiness. He lived for over a millennium, and somehow he died with nothing. That's the cautionary tale right there. The Sith Code talks about passion, strength, power, and victory. But if you chase immortality so hard, you forget why you're alive in the first place. What even is the point? Vitiate reached the pinnacle of what the dark side can do, and then just kept going until even the Force wanted nothing to do with him. And for all the horrors he caused, all the lives he ruined, and all the power he hoarded, it ended with a whisper. Alright, so here's the thing about Darth Bane. He wasn't born into some grand Sith legacy. The guy started out as Dessel, a miner on the backwater hellhole known as a Patros. And if that name sounds like a place where dreams go to die, you're not far off. His childhood? Rough. His dad was a drunk, abusive, constantly blaming Dessel for everything that went wrong in his life. And to make things worse, he grew up surrounded by miners who were just as bitter and violent. It wasn't a community. It was more like a bunch of angry guys sharing a hole in the ground. Dessel learned early on that if you don't hit first, you might not get a second chance. And that survival instinct, it never really left him. Even before he understood what the Force was, he could feel it. Like a reflex, he'd win fights he shouldn't have, make perfect calls in dangerous situations, sense people's next moves before they made them. The Force was in him from the start. He just didn't know what to call it. Eventually, after a pretty serious altercation, where he accidentally kills a Republic soldier during a card game, with a punch by the way, he realizes he's got to skip town. So he joins the Sith military under a fake name. Because yeah, during this era, the Sith weren't hiding in caves yet. They had a full-blown empire with armies, fleets, and open war against the Republic. The Sith Order back then was huge, and also kind of a disaster. And this is where Dessel really starts to shine. On the battlefield, he's ruthless, focused, and always somehow one step ahead of everyone else. His superiors notice. Eventually, he ends up being pulled from the front lines and invited to study at the Sith Academy on Korriban. That's where Dessel dies and Darth Bane begins. Now, quick side note, the Sith Academy at the time, it wasn't like Hogwarts, it was more like Battle Royale with textbooks. Dozens of students, all trying to kill each other for a shot at being noticed. They taught Force powers, sure, but also a ton of manipulation, betrayal, and just straight-up survival tactics. The Sith weren't teaching how to build anything, they were just seeing who could claw their way to the top without choking on ambition. And Bane, he was built for this. He devours the ancient texts, obsesses over Sith history, and quickly realizes something most of the other students missed. The Sith Order is broken. Like, fundamentally broken. At the time, the Sith were doing the whole giant army thing. Dozens of Sith Lords, all with their own followers, all trying to outpower each other. No unity, no structure, just a bunch of angry Force users in black robes yelling over each other. Bane sees this mess and basically goes, yeah, this isn't going to end well. And he's right, because while all these wannabe warlords are out there flexing, Bane's in the library reading ancient texts and discovering the teachings of guys like Darth Revan. And Revan's philosophy hits him like a brick. The idea that the Sith should never be a collective, that power should be concentrated, that real strength only exists when it's earned, passed from master to apprentice through conflict. That's the seed that eventually grows into the rule of two. But we're not there yet. First, Bane has to go through a bit of a breakdown. There's a period during his training where he loses confidence. He pulls back from the Force, starts doubting himself, stops using his powers altogether. It's weird because you expect a guy like Bane to be this unstoppable machine from day one. But this part of his life is more human. He's not perfect, he falls apart. He second guesses everything. But instead of staying broken, he rebuilds himself. Stronger, meaner, smarter. He starts training solo, outside the academy. He dives deep into forbidden techniques. He even teaches himself how to channel pure dark side energy. Stuff so dangerous that the other Sith Masters actually get nervous. They see what he's becoming and realise, oh, we might have created a problem. And yeah, they kind of did. Eventually, the cracks in the Sith Order start to show. The Brotherhood of Darkness, which, side note, sounds like a discount villain group from a cartoon, and they're running the show like a Sith democracy. Everyone's equal. No one's allowed to call themselves Darth. It's all about unity and cooperation. Bane hears that and immediately clocks it as nonsense. He starts writing his own path, studying holocrons, and preparing for the real play. Burn it all down. But before he gets to that final move, there's one last piece he needs. Power. Knowledge, vision, clarity. So he vanishes from the academy, disappears from the war entirely, and goes on a solo journey to find the deepest, oldest Sith secrets. He ends up on Lehon, which used to be the homeworld of the ancient Rakatan Empire. And buried beneath the surface, in the old temple of the ancients, Bane finds exactly what he's been searching for, Darth Revan's holocron. Now, this isn't just another datapad full of Sith trivia. This is where Bane finds a philosophy, one that makes more sense to him than anything the Brotherhood ever taught. Revan's teachings lay it out clearly. The Sith should never be a mob. Power gets diluted when it's spread too thin. When there are too many Sith, they turn on each other, waste time fighting each other for scraps, and end up getting wiped out by the Jedi over and over again, and Bane agrees completely. So right there, deep underground on a forgotten world, Bane makes a decision that'll reshape the Sith forever. He decides that the Brotherhood has to go. All of it. The structure, the fake unity, the no Darths allowed nonsense. It all needs to be burned down. And just like that, he becomes Darth Bane. For real this time. And from that point on, he's not trying to rise through the ranks anymore. He's trying to replace the whole system. Now here's where things get nuts. He goes back into Sith space, but not as a returning ally. He's not there to rejoin the Brotherhood. He's there to wipe them out. But Bane doesn't just charge in swinging a lightsaber. He uses the kind of plan that only a long-game Sith would appreciate. He manipulates the Brotherhood into performing a ritual called the Thought Bomb. Yeah, the name is exactly as ridiculous as it sounds. It's a massive dark side weapon, a force ritual that annihilates every force-sensitive being caught in its blast radius. The Brotherhood, led by Lord Khan, thinks they can use it to destroy the Jedi once and for all during the final battle on Ruusan. Bane plays them like a fiddle. He lets them believe it's a good idea. He even encourages it. And when the ritual is performed, everyone in that valley, every Jedi, every Sith, every last Force user is wiped out. Their spirits are trapped forever in this weird Force bubble, like a haunted Force snow globe. And Bane, he's not there. He watched from a distance, survives, walks away as the only Sith left standing. That's the moment the rule of two begins. One master, one apprentice. No more, no less. Bane's belief is simple. The Sith don't need numbers, they need quality. The apprentice learns everything the master knows, grows stronger, and eventually kills them. If they fail, they weren't worthy. If they succeed, they're now the master. That cycle ensures the Sith only ever get more powerful. Now, of course, Bane needs an apprentice, and this is where Darth Zana comes in. Just a young girl at the time of the Ruusan massacre. But Bane senses something in her. Not just raw force power, but potential, will, darkness. She's been through trauma, survived on her own, and has that little spark of cold ambition that Bane knows he can shape into something dangerous. So he takes her under his wing, starts training her, not with hand-holding, but the same hard philosophy he used on himself. Study, discipline, fear. If she wants to become Sith, she has to earn it. He pushes her constantly, and she pushes back. Not in some dramatic rebellion, but in subtle, growing confidence. Zana learns quickly, absorbs his teachings, and starts developing her own style, particularly with Sith sorcery, something Bane himself never fully mastered. Meanwhile, Bane isn't just sitting around. He's still working on perfecting the rule of two. He wants it to last, not just for one generation, but for centuries. So he starts looking for ways to make sure his teachings survive beyond him. He builds a holocron. He carves his philosophy into stone and knowledge into legacy. But deep down, there's a problem. Bane starts to wonder if Zana will ever be strong enough to challenge him. That's the whole point of the system, survival of the strongest. But what if your apprentice just doesn't come for you? What if she plays it safe, stays under your thumb, and the system dies in its second generation? It starts to eat at him, quietly and slowly. So now we're in the final stretch of Darth Bane's story. He's done what no Sith before him had the guts, or frankly, the clarity to do. He nuked the entire Sith Order with one move, rebuilt it from scratch, and trained an apprentice who wasn't just powerful, but terrifying in her own way. At this point, the rule of two isn't just a theory, it's happening, it's alive. But Bane's getting older, and Zannah isn't making a move. Is she waiting for him to die naturally just so she can inherit the title without having to earn it? And that possibility, it drives him nuts. He starts doubting her, starts testing her. Quietly, at first, nothing obvious, but the thought sticks with him. What if I made a mistake? What if the rule dies with me? So in true Sith fashion, he starts looking for a backup plan. Bane goes hunting for essence transfer, a dangerous ancient Sith technique that lets you rip your spirit out of your body and shove it into someone else. Basically, possession via force domination. It's not guaranteed to work, but if it does, it means you could, in theory, live forever. You just keep hijacking bodies and jumping hosts like a force-powered parasite. And yes, it's the same trick Sidious later uses to survive death after Endor. So this moment actually links Bane's legacy to the far end of the timeline in a really weird way. Bane never fully perfects it, but he decides if Zannah won't challenge him, he'll force the issue. One final test, one last duel. And yeah, this is the moment it all comes down to. Bane and Zannah face off in an absolutely brutal one-on-one. She comes at him hard with her Sith sorcery, hitting him with illusions, mental attacks, and psychological warfare. Bane tries to overwhelm her with raw strength, because that's always been his thing. Brute force mastery, aggressive lightsaber combat. And make no mistake, Bane is a powerhouse. On a pure power scale, he's way up there. Probably top 5 in terms of physical domination and dark side control. He's not the kind of Sith who rips starships out of the sky or survives for 1,000 years by feeding on planetary life. Guys like Vitiate and Sidious are operating on a whole different scale. Galaxy-wide domination, immortality, spirit transfer mastery, force storms. Bane didn't do that, but here's what he did do, and why he still deserves to be ranked insanely high. He saved the Sith from self-destruction. He rewrote the rules. He created the rule of two, and that idea lasted for 1,000 years, longer than any empire. Zannah isn't just trying to match him. She knows she can't win by playing his game, so she uses everything she's learned. Her unique edge as a sorcerer, her patience, her understanding of the rule itself. And when Bane finally tries to transfer his essence into her body mid-duel, she resists. She shuts him out, refuses to let him in. Zannah survives. She keeps Bane's lightsaber, and for a second there's this eerie moment where her hand twitches, like Bane might have gotten in. And just like that, the rule of two passes to its second generation. Now what can I say? Bane wasn't trying to be the strongest Sith of all time. He was trying to make sure the Sith lasted forever. And honestly, mission accomplished. Let's talk about Darth Vader, the story of how Anakin Skywalker, one of the most gifted Force users the Jedi ever saw, became the most feared enforcer in the galaxy, and why, even with all that power, he never quite reached the top. Now first off, there's no denying Vader's legacy. Everyone knows who he is. Stormtroopers stand straighter when he walks by. Rebel soldiers freak out when they hear his name. Even high-ranking Imperial officers with entire starships under their command get nervous when he's around. He's not just a Sith, he's a symbol. Fear, control, and power. He is the Empire's shadow. But to really understand Vader, you've got to back up. You've got to look at Anakin Skywalker. Because at the core of this whole thing, behind the armor, behind the cape, there's still that kid from Tatooine. The one who grew up a slave, who fixed droids in his free time, who dreamed about flying and freedom and helping people. And yeah, the Jedi took him in. But let's be honest, they never really handled him right. They said he was the chosen one, but then they gave him lectures instead of guidance, rules instead of comfort. And when he showed real emotion, real fear, they treated it like a flaw. So you've got this insanely gifted kid, brimming with power and passion, and they basically tell him to bottle it all up. Be calm, detached, and feel nothing. That didn't go well. Anakin was never built to follow blindly. He was a reactor. He felt things intensely, and when he cared hard. Padme, Obi-Wan, his mum, these weren't just relationships to him, they were everything. And when the Jedi refused to help him save them, especially his mother, and later Padme, he cracked. That's when Sidious slid in. Palpatine doesn't force Anakin to the dark side. He nudges, feeds his doubt, guilt, and fear. And when Anakin thinks Padme is going to die, Just like his mum did, Sidious offers him exactly what he's been craving this whole time: control. A way to stop death, a way to finally protect the people he loves. That's the key. Anakin didn't fall because he wanted power. He fell because he couldn't deal with losing anyone else. And so, Darth Vader is born. Not in a moment of rage, but in a moment of desperation. He marches into the Jedi Temple with a blade in his hand and fear in his heart. He betrays his order, burns everything behind him, because he thinks it's the only way to save Padme. And of course, it doesn't work. He ends up killing her anyway. Not directly, but close enough that it doesn't matter. His worst fear comes true, and now he's stuck in a body that's more machine than man, screaming inside a metal prison he can never escape. This is where the Vader you think you know starts to take shape, because from the outside, Vader looks like the perfect Sith. Cold, ruthless, and efficient. He crushes rebellions, chokes officers, hunts Jedi across the galaxy without breaking a sweat. Lightsaber duels, he dominates. Force powers, he can literally rip a hallway apart with his mind. He's unstoppable. But inside, it's a different story. Vader isn't fueled by ambition like most Sith. He doesn't want to conquer more worlds or build some eternal empire. He's just empty. The spark that made Anakin special, the compassion, fire, drive, it's still there somewhere, but buried so deep, even he can't feel it most of the time. And that's the tragedy, because Vader could have been the strongest. Anakin had potential that scared the Council. He was born of the Force, had no father, and was one of the most naturally gifted duelists and pilots ever. If he had stayed on the light side, or even just balanced himself out, he might have surpassed every Jedi and every Sith who came before him. But he never got there. The suit he's stuck in, it's a limiter. It weakens his connection to the Force. He can't move the way he used to. He's in constant pain, and his senses are dulled. Palpatine didn't want a partner. He wanted a weapon. So Vader spends years doing the Emperor's bidding. Silent, detached, he's surviving. Day after day, choking down the rage, the guilt, pain of what he's done, and yet he never fully let it go. That's what makes him different from other Sith. Other guys embraced the dark. They drank it like wine. But Vader, even at his worst, there's a flicker of something else, a memory of who he used to be, and that tiny flicker is what keeps him from ever truly becoming the strongest, because real Sith power comes from total commitment. And Vader never stops looking back, hunting down surviving Jedi one by one. Some of them were his former peers, a few were even people who once trusted him. And he had to show no mercy. He had to kill them all, not because he enjoyed it or because he got anything out of it, but because that's what the Empire expected from Darth Vader. The moment he flinched, the moment he hesitated or asked why, that's when Sidious would start looking for a replacement, and Sidious always had backups in mind. That was part of Vader's hell, honestly. He wasn't the Emperor's one and only. He was the current tool. And there were always experiments. Projects like Inquisitors, Secret Apprentices, clones and Sith artifacts. If any one of them showed more potential than Vader, you better believe Sidious would have tossed him aside without a second thought. So Vader had power, but he also lived under constant pressure and constant suspicion. Sidious never fully trusted him, and Vader knew that. He had to walk this tightrope between being terrifying enough to do the Emperor's bidding, but never strong or free-thinking enough to threaten his control. And that's the key difference between Vader and someone like Sidious or Bane. Sidious was the system. He controlled it top to bottom. He wasn't looking over his shoulder. He was the guy in the shadows. Bane created his own path, wiped the board, built a legacy. But Vader, he was stuck in the system he helped build, trapped by the same chain he once thought would save him. It's like the ultimate irony. Anakin joined Sidious to gain control, to protect the people he loved, and instead he became a prisoner in his own armor, answering to the very man who lied to him from day one. In lightsaber combat, he adjusted, became more defensive, more deliberate, but he could never fight the way he did as Anakin. His duels were slower, more crushing, less finesse, more brute force, and in a way, that became his signature. Overwhelming, implacable, impossible to stop once he locked onto you. But underneath that was still frustration, rage, regret. The galaxy thought Vader was untouchable, but inside the suit, it was a mess of pain. Not just physical, emotional, psychological. He was haunted constantly. Visions of what could have been, echoes of Obi-Wan's betrayal, or at least what he saw as betrayal. He buried it deep, but it never really went away, and over time, you can see it eating at him. The mask cracks in little moments. You see it when he hesitates before killing a Jedi who begs for mercy, or when he quietly visits Padmé's tomb in secret, or when he hears about Luke and doesn't immediately go, "Let's kill the boy," but instead says, "What if we rule together?" Vader's not driven by conquest, he's driven by what's left, by this weird flickering hope that maybe there's still something salvageable under all that armor, that maybe he hasn't lost everything. And that right there, that's why he never fully climbs the Sith ladder, because unlike Bane or Plagueis or Sidious, Vader never fully gives himself to the dark side. He's constantly split, torn between the past and the present, between what he's done and what he could have been. He lashes out when things go wrong, when people remind him that he's not in control, that he's still just a servant wearing a crown that doesn't fit. And that's what makes his story so different, because deep down, he's not trying to climb higher. He's not trying to overthrow Sidious and remake the galaxy in his image. He just wants peace, something he lost a long time ago, and doesn't believe he'll ever get back. Then Luke shows up, and the moment that happens, things start shifting. You can tell something's bothering him. He learns he has a son, and suddenly he's not quite as locked in as he used to be. That cold, machine-like consistency starts to crack in small, quiet ways. It's not that he has some fatherly instinct kicking in, or some sudden surge of regret. It's more like a reminder. Luke reminds him that he used to be someone else, that he had a different life, different choices. It doesn't make him soft or emotional, it just makes him start to think a little more. And for Vader, who's spent 2 decades doing nothing but obeying, that's a problem. For Sidious too. The Emperor starts tightening the grip, more pressure, more manipulation, more of that quiet tension where you're not sure if Vader is still the loyal apprentice or a possible threat. And honestly, that's where it becomes clear that Vader was never meant to rise. He wasn't allowed to. Sidious never gave him room to grow. He built the armor to limit him. He gave him no real power structure outside of what was assigned. Vader didn't have an army of his own. He wasn't teaching Sith ideology to anyone. He wasn't shaping the future. He was a tool with a limited shelf life. All that potential, gone, buried under the job of keeping the lights on for someone else's empire. And that's the part where you realize Vader was never really free. He had power, sure, but no purpose beyond what someone else decided. Even when he learns about Luke, his instinct isn't to build something new. It's just to maybe swap out Sidious with someone else, maybe finally take control for once. But even that doesn't happen. In the final confrontation, Luke refuses to kill him. That's the moment that flips the script. Vader feels redeemed because, for the first time in a long time, someone pushes back without trying to destroy him. A kid standing there, saying he won't play the game. Vader's stuck between the Emperor and his son. 2 people with very different ideas about what comes next. And yeah, he makes a decision. He steps in, he saves Luke and destroys Sidious. He picks a side and that's the end of it. And that choice? It doesn't make him the most powerful Sith. It's not even a Sith move. It's just a guy doing one right thing after a very long list of wrong ones. That's why he doesn't take the top spot on this list. Because Vader's arc ends with him leaving the Sith behind, not mastering them. He doesn't pass on the teachings or build anything. He doesn't replace Sidious or outmaneuver him. He just finally gets tired of the whole thing and shuts it down. Does that make him weak? Definitely not. Physically, he was one of the most dangerous Force users in history. He fought through pain that would drop anyone else. His connection to the Force was still powerful, even after the injuries. He took down Jedi Masters long after his prime, and he made an entire rebellion think twice every time they heard he might be nearby. But here we talk about control, vision, and legacy. Bane rewrote the entire Sith structure. Sidious took over the Republic from the inside. Even Plagueis, who never got his big moment, was shaping the long game through economics, bloodlines, and Force research. Vader? He didn't plan anything, and he didn't have any say in what the Sith would become. His legacy was Anakin's legacy, not Vader's. That's the part that mattered, and it was buried under armor for 2 decades. So if you're looking for the most feared Sith, Vader's up there. Most iconic? Definitely. He was a symbol, a warning, proof that even the strongest can get stuck when they're being used. His story wasn't about rising to the top, it was about breaking free, and that's why he'll never be number one on this list. So let's get into Darth Plagueis, a name that sounds way cooler than what the guy actually looked like. If you go digging through Star Wars lore expecting some caped-up Sith warlord with a lightsaber the size of a starship engine, you're gonna be disappointed. Plagueis wasn't the lightsaber dueling, galaxy yelling kind of Sith. He was more like a mad scientist who accidentally became a legend because he took the Force way too seriously. The guy was a moon, those tall, bony aliens with long faces that look like they haven't eaten solid food in 20 years. Not exactly intimidating. Honestly, he looked more like an accountant who got lost on the way to his cubicle and stumbled into Sith politics. But what he lacked in fashion and intimidation, he made up for with probably the most dangerous mind in the Sith Order's entire history, because Darth Plagueis didn't care about power in the blow-up-a-planet kind of way. He wasn't chasing cool points. He wanted control, permanent control, and not just over governments or armies. He wanted control over life itself. That's what made him scary. His obsession? Midichlorians. Yeah, I know. Star Wars fans bring up midichlorians and everybody starts twitching, but Plagueis took them seriously. Like, way too seriously. To him, midichlorians weren't just some biological, force-reading thing. They were the secret to bending reality. He ran experiments, messed with life forms, and kept weird stuff in tanks. Imagine your local creepy science teacher suddenly learning how to manipulate life and death and thinking, I should try this on actual people. And here's the thing, he kind of made it work. He got dangerously close. He could prevent death in certain cases. He could influence life to form where it wasn't supposed to. There's even that whole theory that Anakin Skywalker was basically his science project. Like, oops, made a superpowered Force baby by messing with the Force too much, my bad. So yeah, Plagueis wasn't waving a lightsaber around or shouting from a balcony. He was just this cold, calculating Force mechanic who wanted to break the system from the inside. But let's not pretend he was some quiet monk with good intentions. Nah, he was still Sith to the bone, ruthless, manipulative, a complete control freak. He believed in the rule of two. You know, one master, one apprentice. But he didn't want his apprentice to ever replace him. He wanted to break that rule too. His version of the Sith plan was, train an apprentice powerful enough to help me take over the galaxy, but keep him dumb enough not to kill me in my sleep. Spoiler, that plan did not work. But before we get to that little hiccup, you've got to understand the scope of what he was building. Plagueis wasn't just running a solo science fair project, he was laying down the groundwork for the entire downfall of the Jedi Order. He was the one who spotted young Palpatine and thought, oh yeah, this one's broken enough to turn into the next Dark Lord. That decision right there changed everything, because what made Plagueis really terrifying wasn't his Force power, it was his ability to see people like chess pieces. He wasn't out there doing Sith lightning tricks or shouting about revenge. He was sitting back, playing the longest game possible, funding political campaigns, manipulating trade federations, creating economic chaos, and setting the galaxy up for a fall. This dude was out here doing galactic tax fraud as a way to build an empire. And the Jedi? They didn't see a thing coming. Because who would suspect some weird antisocial moon behind the curtain pulling the strings? He wasn't even on their radar. They were out there worried about bounty hunters and space battles, and Plagueis was over here investing in the future Emperor like it was a stock that was about to explode. Now imagine being so deep in your own genius that you start thinking, you know what? I'm too smart to fail. I've planned every step. I've accounted for every possible outcome. I am literally unbeatable. Yeah, that's the part where everything usually falls apart, but we'll get there. For now, what's wild about Plagueis is just how quietly he operated. But his impact is massive. He trained the guy who would become the most powerful Sith in history, and not just in the throws lightning way, but in the destroys democracy and runs the galaxy for 2 decades way. You don't hear stories about him destroying temples. You hear whispers that he found a way to manipulate the Force itself. He believed the Force wasn't something mystical or random. To him, it was a tool, a machine. And machines, you can reprogram those. Let's talk about how Darth Plagueis made the single, smartest, and dumbest decision of his life, training Palpatine. Credit where it's due. Plagueis had an eye for talent. He didn't just pick some random Force sensitive from the back streets. He found this sleek, creepy, charming politician in training from Naboo. a guy who looked like he already had plans for office before he knew what the Force was. And their whole relationship, it was weird. Two cold, calculating dudes trying to outthink everyone in the galaxy, and occasionally outthink each other. Plagueis saw Palpatine as a tool, a really sharp, ambitious tool, but still something he could manage. Which, yeah, that's a sentence that never ends well. But for a while, it actually worked. Plagueis and Sidious were kind of the ultimate Sith business duo. Plagueis handled the quiet science experiments, the backroom manipulation, the banking systems, very behind-the-scenes stuff. Meanwhile, Palpatine started climbing the political ladder like it was made for him. Nobody suspected him. He wasn't out there doing Sith tricks or throwing Jedi out windows. He was just a senator, smiling too much and getting way too good at making people say yes to things they really shouldn't. And Plagueis loved it. This was the plan working. Jedi, still clueless. The Senate, completely wrapped around Palpatine's finger. The galaxy, basically 1 or 2 tragedies away from giving the Sith full control. Plagueis must have been pacing around his lab like, yep, just a few more years, immortality's around the corner. But, and this is important, he stopped looking over his shoulder. That's the first big mistake. Because if there's one rule you don't break as a Sith, it's this. Never trust your apprentice. Ever. Doesn't matter how charming they are. Doesn't matter if you trained them from scratch. If they bring you soup when you're sick, you check it for poison. That's the whole point of the rule of 2. One to have the power, one to want it bad enough to kill you for it. And Plagueis knew this. He taught this. But somehow, somewhere along the way, he convinced himself he was the exception. Meanwhile, Palpatine is over there learning, adapting, and quietly realizing something. Why do I need this old dude around when I'm the one actually doing all the heavy lifting? Because by this point, Palpatine was planning everything. The Clone Wars? That was mostly Sidious's game. The Jedi Purge? He was already thinking about it. The future Empire? Already sketched out. Plagueis thought he was in control, but really, he was like the guy who invented fire and then left it unattended in a dry forest. Plagueis never saw it coming. He actually started thinking he didn't need the rule of 2 anymore. He was so obsessed with immortality and controlling the Force that he started floating the idea of ruling the galaxy together with Sidious as equals. Like a dark side buddy cop show, just 2 Sith chilling forever while the galaxy burns outside. He seriously believed that Sidious would just say, "Sure, Master, let's do it," like they were going to share a throne and sip death-proof cocktails for the next 1,000 years. But come on, this is Palpatine we're talking about, the guy who makes betrayal look like an art form. He smiled, nodded, maybe even fluffed Plagueis' pillow that night, and then waited until he was asleep and murdered him. It was the quietest Sith betrayal in history. And that's how Plagueis went out. All that power, all that knowledge, all those midichlorian experiments. And he dies without even waking up. Which, honestly, for a guy obsessed with cheating death, is just cruel irony. But you know what? It proves something. Plagueis may have been a genius. He may have been the mastermind behind one of the greatest galactic collapses in Star Wars history. But he forgot the one rule you can't forget when playing the Sith game. If you train someone to be powerful enough to change the galaxy, they're probably going to change it without you. But you know what? It proves something. Plagueis may have been a genius. He may have been the mastermind behind one of the greatest galactic collapses in Star Wars history. But he forgot the one rule you can't forget when playing the Sith game. If you train someone to be powerful enough to change the galaxy, they're probably going to change it without you. And yeah, Palpatine did exactly that. Took all of Plagueis' groundwork, all his manipulation, all his quiet moves, and flipped it into a full-blown dictatorship. He hit the gas on that Sith plan so hard, it basically became the blueprint for every villain in the galaxy moving forward. So let's answer the question that's probably already been poking at your brain since we started this whole thing. If Darth Plagueis was so smart, so powerful, and basically wrote the whole script that led to the Empire, why isn't he in the top 3? Why not top 1 or top 2? Or at least ahead of some of the more sword-swingy Sith who barely even made long-term impact. And look, I get it. The guy was a full-on Force engineer. He nearly cracked immortality. He found Palpatine, trained him, helped him rise to power, and created the conditions for one of the biggest regime takeovers in galactic history. That's not a resume you just brush off. But here's the thing. He didn't finish anything. Like nothing he started was actually completed by him. Not the Sith takeover, not the rule of two payoff, not even the midichlorian magic trick he was obsessed with. He basically played a massive game of galactic Jenga, pulled out 90% of the blocks, looked around and then walked away, thinking it wouldn't collapse on him in his sleep. That's kind of the tragic comedy of Plagueis. He was too focused on the details, too obsessed with the science, the force manipulation, the secret source of life and death, that he completely forgot to watch his own back. He trained someone who literally embodies betrayal, then let his guard down like they were roommates going halves on a Sith lair. He wasn't killed in a battle. He wasn't taken out by the Jedi. He wasn't overthrown after a dramatic standoff. He got killed by his apprentice on what was basically Space Couch Night. That's not a top 3 exit. Let's put it in simple terms. Plagueis was the architect, not the builder. He drafted the plans for a Sith-controlled galaxy, but he never got to move in. That's a pretty big deal when you're ranking Sith based on impact and follow-through. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm not saying he wasn't impressive. If we were doing a list of the smartest Sith, he's top 2, no question. If we're talking potential, also right up there. But this list is about who actually made things happen, who left a mark on the galaxy that they themselves stamped into reality. And Plagueis, for all his genius, kind of handed the pen to someone else before he could sign his name. And that someone else, yeah, he ran wild with it. Palpatine took all of Plagueis' theories and made them real. He turned Republic senators into pawns, cloned an entire army, gaslit the Jedi out of existence, and then ruled the galaxy in broad daylight for decades. You could argue that Sidious was Plagueis' success story, and that's true to an extent. But Sidious also made it very clear that he got there by deleting Plagueis from the picture the moment he became inconvenient. It's like Plagueis built the spaceship, fueled it up, plotted the course, and then got shoved out the airlock before takeoff. And let's be honest, the whole midichlorian immortality obsession? Yeah, cool concept, but it never actually worked. The idea that he could influence the Force to create life, or stop death entirely, that's wild. But there's no proof he ever pulled it off. Not on himself, not on others. All we know is he thought he could. He was close, he made promises, maybe he even scared the Force a little. But that's still not a result. It's just the world's most intense science fair project that ended with the judge getting stabbed. Now, let's zoom out a bit, because even though he didn't finish the job, Plagueis still deserves a lot of credit for shaping the galaxy behind the scenes. While other Sith were out doing flashy stuff, lighting up battlefields, taking on Jedi one-on-one, Plagueis was rewriting the playbook. He was proof that you didn't need to throw punches to win. Just money, time, and a really strong desire to bend life to your will. The problem is, when you're that careful and slow and deliberate, you don't get a second chance. So why is he at 5th place? Because he almost changed everything. Because his apprentice did more with his plan than he ever could. Because he wanted to live forever and got snuffed out mid-snore. That's not top 3 material. That's a solid 5. Right in the middle of the elite. Feared, brilliant, deeply influential, but not quite legendary. Still, if there's one Sith whose ideas were bigger than anyone else's, it was him. Plagueis thought long-term, in a way no one else did. He didn't just want power, he wanted permanence, immortality, a Sith future that could never be undone. That's a vision you've got to respect, even if it ended with him becoming a cautionary tale about letting your apprentice pick the wine. So, yeah, genius? Absolutely. Dangerous? Without question. The guy fell asleep on the one night he really shouldn't have. Darth Revan. Man, where do we even start with this one? This dude's like the Star Wars version of It's Complicated. He was a Jedi hero, then he's a Sith warlord, then he's back to being a Jedi like nothing ever happened. And through all of that, he's still out here winning wars, gaining loyal followers, and somehow making every faction in the galaxy either respect him or fear him, sometimes both. And that's what makes Revan such a headache when it comes to rankings. Like, are we judging him for what he did as a Sith or everything? Because if you're just looking at pure Sith domination, Revan's time wearing the red and black badge was actually pretty short. But holy hell did he make an impression. Let's back up though. Revan starts out as a Jedi, and not just some temple background extra. This guy was front and center during the Mandalorian Wars. The Jedi Council was out here meditating and holding meetings, trying to decide whether to intervene. And Revan was like, okay, but people are literally dying, so I'm going to go handle it. And then he just does. Takes a group of Jedi who agreed with him, later called the Revanchists, jumps into the war, takes command of Republic forces like it's his job, and turns the tide of the whole conflict. Not by waving his lightsaber around in a flashy way, but with pure tactical brilliance. Like, this guy made war plans that looked like they came out of some dark side version of a chess championship. He outthought the Mandalorians at every step. And then, once the war is basically over, he disappears, which is never a good sign in Star Wars, right? If a Jedi goes missing after winning a war, just start prepping the He Turned Sith PowerPoint. And yep, that's exactly what happened. Revan and his buddy Malak go off chasing some ancient Sith Empire nonsense in the unknown regions, and whatever they found out there, it changes them. They come back wearing dark robes, commanding their own fleet, and casually kicking off a brand new war, this time against the Republic, like a galactic Uno reverse card. So now we've got Darth Revan, full-on Sith Lord, leading a new empire with all the military talent he had before, except now he's got zero Jedi restraint and a lot more red lightsaber action. But even as a Sith, Revan was different. He wasn't evil for the sake of it. He wasn't doing the cackling emperor thing or the burn it all down philosophy. He believed the Republic was too weak to survive the bigger threats coming from outside the galaxy. Threats he'd seen firsthand. So his plan was, conquer it now, make it stronger, rule it the right way, and then save it later. Which is a very Sith way of saying, I know what's best, even if it means everyone hates me. And honestly, it almost worked. His Sith Empire was brutal, but it was organized, strategic. Way less chaos than what most Sith regimes turn into. He still had honor. He didn't randomly kill his own people for fun. His troops respected him. His generals actually followed orders. You know, stuff that usually falls apart the second a red lightsaber shows up in the chain of command. Even the Jedi Council, who hated everything he was doing, couldn't deny the guy's brilliance. He wasn't just powerful in the Force, he was a leader, a war hero turned war criminal turned something else entirely. And here's the crazy part, people still loved him. His charisma was off the charts. Soldiers followed him into battle, not just because they were ordered to, but because they believed in him. They believed he knew what he was doing. It's like if Napoleon and Batman fused into a Force-sensitive military genius who happened to flip sides now and then. But this version of Revan, the full Sith version, doesn't last forever. Because eventually, the Jedi manage to capture him. Malak bails on him. Revan's memory gets wiped. The Jedi try to fix him. And that's where this whole story goes from interesting Sith to what even is this guy anymore? We'll get into that mess next. How the galaxy's most effective Sith warlord became a blank slate, got reprogrammed, and had to basically choose his entire identity from scratch. Spoiler, it doesn't get less complicated from here. But for now, let's just sit with this version of Revan, the Sith Revan. Not a villain and not a hero. Just someone who believed in strength, strategy, and doing what needed to be done, even if it meant becoming the thing he once swore to fight. So, Revan's at the height of his Sith power, commanding fleets, giving the Jedi a run for their credits, probably thinking 5 moves ahead of everyone, when it all comes crashing down. And no, it's not some epic duel that does him in. It's his old buddy Malak turning on him mid-battle. Classic Sith move. They're fighting the Republic, and Malak just opens fire on Revan's ship like, yeah, I'm done being second in command. Real subtle. Somehow, Revan survives, barely, and the Jedi swoop in and capture what's left of him. And instead of locking him up, or, I don't know, giving him a trial or anything normal, they're like, you know what we should do? Let's just wipe his memory and see what happens. Which, bold move, you've got the most dangerous military mind in recent history sitting unconscious in front of you, and your idea is basically, let's turn him into a blank slate and hope for the best. Jedi therapy, apparently. So they wipe him, fully, gone. He wakes up with no clue who he is. No Sith, no Jedi, nothing. Just a guy with a bad haircut and some weird vibes. The Jedi Council is like, hey, you're with us now. And he's just, cool, I guess. What's a lightsaber? And from here, things get messy. Because you know that whole nature versus nurture debate? Revan becomes the living version of that. He gets a second chance at life. No memory of being a Sith, and yet he still ends up doing all the same stuff. Leading people, taking command, making big decisions in high-stress moments. The war hero instincts, still there. The leadership skills, instantly back. It's like his personality didn't reset, just his name. And it gets even weirder when he starts retracing his own past without realizing it. He's basically out there hunting Sith and doesn't realize he used to be their leader. Imagine walking into a Sith temple, looking around like, wow, this place feels familiar, and having no idea it's because you built it. Eventually the truth comes out, slowly, awkwardly, and with a lot of side-eye from the Jedi. Like, hey, so funny story. You used to be the most dangerous Sith Lord we've faced in a generation. Anyway, how's the weather? When Revan finds out who he really was, he chooses to stay on the light side, and that choice is what really separates him from everyone else on this list. Most Sith, you give them power, a following, and a second chance, and they double down. But Revan? He looked at the whole Sith thing, looked at the Jedi thing, and went, honestly, both of you are kind of broken. And then he tries to forge his own path, his own version of balance. He doesn't just blindly follow the Jedi again. He doesn't relapse into full Sith mode. He just becomes Revan, not the title, not the mask, not the alignment, just himself, which makes him more human than basically every other Sith we're talking about. And people loved him for it, because while other Sith were out there trying to dominate through fear, Revan inspired loyalty. Not because of the Force powers or the lightsaber tricks, but because of who he was. Even when people knew his past, even when they found out he'd once tried to conquer the Republic, they still followed him, because they believed in him. That kind of influence? You can't fake that. But from a Sith ranking perspective, yeah, this is where it starts to affect his position. Because once Revan turns back to the light, his time as a Sith is basically over. That phase of his life becomes a past chapter. Impactful, sure, but also unfinished. He doesn't carry the Sith banner to the end. He doesn't shape the Sith legacy the way others like Sidious or Bane do. Instead, he leaves it behind and starts chasing something bigger, something in between. It's admirable, it's mature, it's fascinating, but it also means he's not cracking the top 5. So, Revan's at the height of his Sith power, commanding fleets, giving the Jedi a run for their credits, probably thinking 5 moves ahead of everyone when it all comes crashing down. And no, it's not some epic duel that does him in. It's his old buddy Malak turning on him mid-battle. Classic Sith move. They're fighting the Republic, and Malak just opens fire on Revan's ship like, I'm done being second in command. Real subtle. Somehow, Revan survives, barely, and the Jedi swoop in and capture what's left of him, and instead of locking him up, or, I don't know, giving him a trial or anything normal, they're like, you know what we should do? Let's just wipe his memory and see what happens. Which, bold move, you've got the most dangerous military mind in recent history, sitting unconscious in front of you. And your idea is basically, let's turn him into a blank slate and hope for the best. Jedi therapy, apparently. So they wipe him. He wakes up with no clue who he is. No Sith, no Jedi, nothing. Just a guy with a bad haircut and some weird vibes. And from here, things get messy. Because you know that whole nature versus nurture debate? Revan becomes the living version of that. He gets a second chance at life. No memory of being a Sith, and yet he still ends up doing all the same stuff. Leading people, taking command, making big decisions in high-stress moments. The war hero instincts? Still there. The leadership skills? Instantly back. It's like his personality didn't reset. Just his name. And it gets even weirder when he starts retracing his own past without realizing it. He's basically out there, hunting Sith, and doesn't realize he used to be their leader. Imagine walking into a Sith temple, looking around like, wow, this place feels familiar, and having no idea it's because you built it. Eventually, the truth comes out, slowly, awkwardly, and with a lot of side-eye from the Jedi. When Revan finds out who he really was, he chooses to stay on the light side, and that choice is what really separates him from everyone else on this list. Most Sith, you give them power, a following, and a second chance, and they double down. But Revan? He looked at the whole Sith thing, looked at the Jedi thing and went, honestly, both of you are kind of broken. And then he tries to forge his own path, his own version of balance. He doesn't just blindly follow the Jedi again. He doesn't relapse into full Sith mode. He just becomes Revan. Not the title, not the mask, not the alignment, just himself. Which makes him more human than basically every other Sith we're talking about. And people loved him for it, because while other Sith were out there trying to dominate through fear, Revan inspired loyalty. Not because of the Force powers or the lightsaber tricks, but because of who he was, even when people knew his past, even when they found out he'd once tried to conquer the Republic. they still followed him, because they believed in him. That kind of influence? You can't fake that. But from a Sith ranking perspective, yeah, this is where it starts to affect his position. Because once Revan turns back to the light, his time as a Sith is basically over. That phase of his life becomes a past chapter. Impactful, sure, but also unfinished. He doesn't carry the Sith banner to the end. He doesn't shape the Sith legacy the way others like Sidious or Bane do. Instead, he leaves it behind and starts chasing something bigger, something in between. It's admirable, it's mature, it's fascinating, but it also means he's not cracking the top 5. The man could fight, and when it came to raw ability, both with the lightsaber and the Force, he was right up there with the best of them. Let's start with lightsaber combat. Revan was brutally efficient. You know how some characters fight like they're dancing? Revan wasn't that guy. His style was all about control and precision. One strike to end the fight, not 10 to show off. In the Mandalorian Wars, he was literally carving through front lines, not from the back giving orders, but at the front, leading troops personally. And the Mandalorians were no joke. They were warriors trained from birth to fight Jedi, and Revan still made them look like background extras. He even took down Mandalore the Ultimate, the leader of their entire culture, in single combat. And he didn't just win, he wiped him out so cleanly that the Mandalorians basically collapsed as a power for a decade afterward. And that's before he turned Sith. Once he stepped into the dark side, everything just leveled up. His Force abilities became straight up terrifying. Not just the basics like lightning or choke. We're talking large-scale domination, mind control that could sway entire battalions, Force insight that let him predict enemy movements in battle before they made them. He could use battle meditation, which is already an elite Jedi talent, but twisted for Sith tactics, amplifying his side while weakening the morale of his enemies. That's a game changer. He also didn't crack under pressure, ever. One of the wildest things about Revan is how calm he was even during chaos. Whether it was leading planetary invasions or dueling Malak, who by the way, became a full-blown Sith Lord himself, Revan didn't flinch. He could hold his own against multiple opponents, even Jedi Masters, and he wasn't just surviving, he was dominating. And even after he lost his memory and basically had to relearn everything, he still managed to fight like a veteran. He picked up a lightsaber again, like it was second nature. That should tell you something. Like, imagine losing your entire history and still being able to wipe the floor with trained Sith Lords by instinct. That's not just talent, that's next-level Force sensitivity. He even tanked some of the most ridiculous challenges in galactic history. Force storms, ancient Sith monstrosities, entire temples exploding, you name it. There's a reason people talk about him like a myth. Even after his death, there's this weird fragmented version of him that continues to influence events through sheer willpower. In terms of raw power, combat skill, and Force mastery, Revan checks every box. He's not just one of the strongest. He's probably in the conversation with people like Vader, Sidious, and Bane. And unlike some of them, he could lead armies and walk into a duel and hold his own. No bodyguards, no hiding behind tricks, just straight up skill. So with all that, why isn't he higher? Well, that's where the context kicks in, because despite being crazy powerful, Revan wasn't purely Sith for very long. He had one foot out the door almost the whole time. His reign didn't last. He didn't build a legacy for the Sith. He didn't reshape the dark side or enforce a new order like Bane did. And he didn't fully embrace the Sith philosophy. He used it, he understood it, but he never truly committed to it. Revan wasn't power-hungry like Sidious, or consumed by darkness like Nihilus. He wasn't a system rebuilder like Bane, or a mind-bending manipulator. Revan was a soldier first, a strategist, a natural leader who happened to dabble in the dark side to get things done. But he didn't live or die by the Sith code. And that's what matters when we're talking about ranking the Sith. So here's where we land. Most tactical? He's top tier. Most balanced in the Force? Possibly top 1. Most human? Absolutely. Most Sith? Not quite. Still an all-timer. Still feared and respected. Still the kind of guy whose name echoes through history long after he's gone. But not the greatest Sith. Because in the end, Revan wasn't ruled by the dark side. He walked into it, mastered it, and walked away. So picture this, a Sith so powerful, so full of raw, apocalyptic energy, That he could literally stand in orbit over a planet, open his metaphorical mouth, and suck the life out of everything on it. Not just people, everything. Cities, oceans, bugs, the air, the Force itself. That's Darth Nihilus. And yeah, on paper, that sounds horrifying. Like, how do you even stop that? How do you duel a guy who doesn't even need to come down from his ship to wreck your whole planet? Except, there's a catch. Nihilus wasn't really a guy. Not anymore. He used to be long time ago. He was a Jedi during the time of the Mandalorian Wars, survived the galaxy-shattering event that was the Mass Shadow Generator. Basically, a super weapon that crashed a bunch of ships and planets into each other in one giant black hole of Force trauma. And Nihilus was caught right in the middle of it. That experience didn't kill him, it broke him. Like, shattered his soul into a Force vacuum, broke him. From that moment on, he became something else. Not just a fallen Jedi, not even a dark side user in the traditional sense. He was more like a wound in the Force, a spiritual sinkhole that had to consume life to survive. That's not hyperbole. The guy was addicted to Force energy, the way a black hole is addicted to mass. And the more he fed, the stronger he got, and the less human he became. That's where the story of Nihilus goes from scary to sad, because he didn't just turn into a Sith to chase power or dominate the galaxy. He needed to feed constantly, just to exist. He was stuck in this cycle of endless hunger. No satisfaction, pleasure, or goal, just this never-ending, Force-steeped craving that controlled everything he did. Anger, fear, ambition. Nihilus didn't have emotions anymore. He burned through them. He was all hollowed out inside. All that was left was the hunger. He couldn't talk, not really. When he tried, it was just this twisted wave of sound, a kind of dark side signal that would fry your brain if you weren't strong enough. His apprentices had to interpret what he wanted. And honestly, that alone says a lot. Nihilus didn't care about ruling. He didn't care about the Sith Empire, the Jedi Order, politics, legacy, none of it. He was like a natural disaster, a Force hurricane. He existed and things died. And yeah, in the short term, that's terrifying. But it's also kind of impractical. Because being powerful is one thing. Being a Sith is something else. The Sith aren't just monsters with cool powers. They're schemers, manipulators. Warriors, yes, but also planners. Palpatine didn't take over the galaxy with Force lightning. He did it with decades of setup. Bane didn't just blow stuff up. He rewrote the rulebook. Even someone like Maul, who wasn't the sharpest tool in the Senate, had goals and tactics. Nihilus? No plans or strategy or vision. Pure hunger. Mindless, soul-deep hunger. He did have allies, like Darth Sion and Darth Traya, or Darth Sion. Whatever, don't know which is the right one, but let's be real. Those relationships didn't last. Sion was basically held together by spite, and Traya was the only one among them with an actual functioning brain. Even she realized Nihilus was a problem and tried to stop him. Not because he was too powerful, he was too broken. His power was his weakness. The more Nihilus fed, the less he could control it. He became unstable. He started draining allies by accident. His own crew had to be careful around him. Eventually, he became so far gone that he couldn't even fight effectively. By the time he ran into the Jedi exile, Mitra Surik, he was still terrifying, sure, but also so bloated with Force energy that he couldn't handle someone who wasn't connected to the Force. She was literally the worst possible matchup for him, and it ended with Nihilus getting shut down in a straight-up duel. And just like that, one of the most dangerous, haunting, unnatural Sith Lords in Star Wars, taken down by someone with no Force connection at all. He was powerful, like absurdly so, but he wasn't really there. You couldn't talk to him. You couldn't reason with him. You couldn't follow him. You couldn't even be sure he knew why he was doing anything. And that's what separates raw power from true Sith mastery. We're going deeper into how Nihilus became this walking Force wound, why he scared even the other Sith, and how his story ended up being more cautionary tale than power fantasy. So, here's where Nihilus gets really interesting. And by interesting, I mean completely terrifying and completely unmanageable at the same time. At this point in his story, Nihilus is one of the 3 remaining Sith Lords in the galaxy. After the Jedi Civil War absolutely shatters everything. That sounds like a dream team, but only if you ignore the fact that Nihilus can't stop himself from draining everything alive within a few miles, including his own people. You're not just risking the Jedi with this guy, You're risking your own side just by standing next to him. That's not a partner. That's a live grenade with a cape. So how did this guy even survive without killing himself or accidentally absorbing his allies every Tuesday? Well, first off, he had a mask, a literal one, and kind of a metaphorical one too. The mask, the iconic one, pale, cracked, empty eyes. That's all that's left of the physical Nihilus. His body was long gone. The dude turned into this hollow shell, bound together by will and pain and hunger. His cloak and mask were kind of like duct tape holding the void together. And speaking of will, that's what gave him form. The only reason Nihilus could still function at all was because overwhelming desire to keep consuming, not ambition, revenge, not even hatred. He didn't even really think in normal ways anymore. That's why his speech couldn't be understood. If you weren't force sensitive, it just sounded like static or thunder. If you were force sensitive, it could literally make you sick, or worse. His presence in the Force was so warped that just standing near him felt like staring into a black hole with no bottom. And again, sounds powerful, right? And it was. Nobody's denying that. When Nihilus shows up, people run. Whole planets surrender just at the idea of him arriving. And when he did arrive, forget it. One time he drained the entire surface of Qatar just because a Jedi meeting was happening there. Just pulled the plug on the whole place. But you know what it actually was? A warning sign. Because it showed everyone, friend and enemy, that this guy was not in control. His hunger was growing. It wasn't something he managed. It managed him. Every time he fed, the urge got stronger. The time between feedings got shorter. He was like a junkie whose drug was the Force itself. And the thing is, the more he fed, the less there was of him left. That's why even Darth Traya, who helped train him, understood that was a mistake. And keep in mind, Traya was all about using pain and betrayal. She wasn't squeamish. But even she could see that Nihilus wasn't a future Sith Emperor. He was just a time bomb with a terrifying voice. And no off switch. It didn't help that Nihilus never really led anything. He had followers, sure, but they followed out of fear, not loyalty. His flagship, the Ravager, was a floating wreck held together by dark side energy. His crew, basically Force zombies, lifeless husks barely clinging to reality. There wasn't a Sith army being trained under him, no future generation, no vision of a new order, just death, dressed up as a cult. And when it came to dealing with his so-called allies, like Sion, there was no partnership. Nihilus didn't do conversations or politics. He just hovered, pulsed with hunger, and occasionally zapped your soul out through your eyes. Not exactly a long-term relationship kind of guy. Let's compare him to the guy just above him, Darth Revan. Revan wasn't just powerful. He led. He inspired. He flipped sides and still had people following him. He built empires, fought wars, and made decisions that changed galactic history. He could talk, think, adapt. Nihilus couldn't even hold a basic conversation without short-circuiting your brain. And yeah, some people say, well, that's the point. Nihilus is supposed to be this unknowable force, like a black hole in the Force. Which, sure, cool idea, terrifying design, but when you put him next to other Sith, it becomes super clear. He didn't build anything. He didn't rule. He didn't reshape Sith ideology. He just existed and left a trail of corpses. Even Plagueis, who never got to pull off his grand plan, had a vision. He was experimenting, evolving the Sith, teaching Sidious, trying to break the life-death barrier. He had goals. Nihilus just wanted to eat, and then eat again. There was no ambition or rise, no fall, just consumption until it killed him. If he had lived longer, he probably would have collapsed under his own weight. He was already losing control by the time of KOTOR 2. Every time he drained a planet, it made the hunger worse. His strength made him weaker over time. That's not a power curve, that's a countdown to disaster. And his end? It wasn't even grand. He gets taken out in a one-on-one duel. No world-shattering battle. For someone who started off sounding like the final boss of existence, Nihilus went out like a software bug getting patched. And again, that doesn't mean he wasn't cool. He was. His design? Iconic. His presence? Terrifying. The sound design alone when he shows up? Instant goosebumps. He was the Sith equivalent of a Force tornado, devastating while it lasted, but gone the second it passed. No legacy, no empire, no ideology, just emptiness. So yeah, he's memorable. He's scary. He's definitely got that, you do not want to run into this guy in a dark alley on Malachor energy. But when it comes to greatness, Nihilus just didn't bring enough to the table. He gets 7 because of the sheer, raw horror of what he was. But he doesn't go any higher because there's just nothing else there. Power without direction, hunger without purpose. Let's be honest, if there were a cool factor category for Sith Lords, Exar Kun would probably be top 1. No competition. Double-bladed lightsaber? Had it first. Ancient armor and dark rituals? Check. Charismatic cult leader vibes with full Jedi corruption package? Absolutely. Even his name sounds like something you'd name your edgy MMO character when you were 14. But underneath all that flash, the guy was basically the Sith equivalent of a gifted student who peaked way too early, thought he could outsmart the entire system, and ended up as a cautionary tale carved into the walls of a jungle. So let's start from the beginning. Exar Kun was a Jedi, a very promising one. Smart, strong in the Force, sharp as a blade, but impatient. And not just in a young and headstrong kind of way. He was the type of student who thought he already knew better than the people teaching him. The Jedi Masters saw potential. He saw limits. He didn't like being told no, especially when it came to forbidden knowledge. You ever meet someone who can't just enjoy something? They have to master it, challenge it, and then tear it down to prove they're above it. That was Kun. The more the Jedi said, leave the ancient Sith stuff alone, the more he was like, oh? You mean this entire collection of cursed artifacts? Don't mind if I do. So eventually, and let's be real, this was inevitable, Kun leaves the Order to go explore the deepest, darkest holes in the Force. And of course, he lands on Korriban, because that's just what Jedi dropouts do in this era. Go to the ancient Sith planet, walk into a tomb that's been sealed for 5,000 years, and immediately get haunted by some dead guy in a mask. In this case, that dead guy is Marka Ragnos, showing up like a creepy old grandpa from the Force beyond, probably thinking, finally, someone with decent cheekbones and no impulse control. And Ragnos, in a ghost form, tells Kun he's destined for greatness, which is like telling a narcissist that they're the chosen one. He eats it up. So now, Exar Kun's on the fast track to Sith Lord status. But unlike other Sith who were slowly twisted by trauma or tragedy, Kun dives in willingly. No hesitation, no inner conflict. He basically runs into the dark side like it's Black Friday at an ancient evil Force outlet store. He learns Sith alchemy. He starts experimenting with forbidden techniques. He creates weird monsters, builds corrupted temples, and starts weaponizing Jedi knowledge against itself. And here's where things really spiral. He starts his own movement. Exar Kun wasn't just a dark side user, he was a recruiter. He went back and started turning other Jedi, students, to the dark side. Not with fear, not with torture, but with speeches, with ideas. He'd walk in like, the Jedi are holding you back. The dark side doesn't limit you. And it worked. People followed him. Young Jedi, frustrated Force users. His movement grew fast, and suddenly, Kun wasn't just some corrupted ex-Jedi. He was a rising Sith Lord with a private army. This is the part where he teams up with Ulic Qel-Droma. Together they become the public face of the Sith's return. It wasn't subtle either. They declared open war on the Republic, and for a while, they were winning. Kun wasn't hiding in shadows. He was flying into battle on massive capital ships, corrupting Jedi Masters in the middle of duels, using dark rituals to extend his power across entire systems. He even tricked the Jedi into holding a peace conference so he could murder their top leaders simultaneously by soul-linking his corrupted apprentices. It was dark, it was brutal, and it was genius. And it was also exactly where the cracks started to show. See, Kun was smart, but he wasn't wise. He had power, tons of it, but he didn't know how to use it sustainably. He was addicted to pushing limits. Every time he got stronger, he immediately went looking for the next forbidden ritual, the next spell, the next impossible edge. He wasn't building a future. He was feeding a high, and the more he fed it, the more unstable everything became. His empire, built on fear and fragile loyalty, his alliance with Ulic, shaky at best, his corrupted Jedi students, fanatical but untrained. And while all this was going on, Kun kept pushing deeper into dark side magic. He wasn't trying to rule the galaxy anymore. He was trying to transcend it, to become a Force god. He wanted immortality, perfect power, total control over life and death. And just when he thought he had it all under control, Ulic gets captured. The Republic hits back. The Jedi mount a counteroffensive, and suddenly, The guy who was once the most dangerous Force user in the galaxy is backed into a corner on Yavin 4, scrambling to cheat death. And what does he do? The most Exar Kun thing imaginable. He performs one final ritual, sacrifices all of his own followers to fuel it, and rips his own soul out of his body, binding it to his temple so he can survive as a Force spirit. He doesn't even die like a normal Sith. He saves himself, but he loses everything else. Empire, allies, legacy. Just a floating ghost, locked in the ruins of his own obsession. And that's where he stays, for thousands of years, just lingering in the background of galactic history, while the rest of the Sith come and go, evolve, change, and outgrow him. So, we left Exar Kun floating in the ruins of his own temple on Yavin 4, his body long gone, his soul stapled to some dark side bricks, and his legacy, well, kinda stalled. Most Sith go out in some blaze of glory, duel to the death, betrayed by an apprentice, thrown down a reactor shaft, something big, something final, but not Kun. He pulled the dark side phantasm card, the ultimate rage quit, and it worked. Sort of. He avoided death, but here's the thing. That's not living. It's not even existing, really. It's just being stuck. Kun didn't become a Force god. He didn't conquer death. He became a haunted statue that nobody visited for 4,000 years. And that's where we see the real gap between raw power and actual greatness. And for the longest time, he was just another ghost story, buried on a moon nobody cared about. But then came the new Jedi Order, Luke Skywalker's little pet project after the Empire collapsed. He brings a bunch of new students to Yavin 4, thinking, hey, this place seems spiritual. Which, yeah, it is, because it's still haunted by a millennia-old Sith with boundary issues. Enter Exar Kun, Force Ghost Edition. And this is where the story kind of loops back around in a weird way. Kun's spirit starts messing with Luke's new students. Not just spooking them, manipulating, corrupting, trying to possess them. Classic Kun behavior, really. Even as a ghost, the man is still trying to turn young Jedi to the dark side, like he's pitching a startup. He even knocks Luke into a Force coma at one point. That's right. A dead Sith who hasn't had a body since before hyperspace lanes were properly mapped, still manages to drop one of the most powerful Jedi in galactic history, like it's nothing. It's wild, but it's also kind of sad, because here's Exar Kun, all this potential, all this ancient power, and what's he doing with it? Haunting teenagers, possessing students, pulling Jedi pranks from beyond the grave, and eventually, he gets defeated. Not by another Sith, not by a Jedi Master, but by a group of Padawans working together, confronting him spiritually. That's how it ends. After all the rituals, wars, temples, and ancient power, it takes a few barely trained Force kids to shut him down, because even they figured out that Kun's just stuck. He's clinging to a legacy that doesn't exist. So when you really look at the full picture, here's what you get. Exar Kun was incredibly strong. He was a visionary. In the worst possible way, he defied the Jedi. He built his own movement. He corrupted others. He came terrifyingly close to reshaping the galaxy. But he had zero discipline, no long game, and no plan beyond get more power. Even the Jedi he corrupted, most of them either died or snapped out of it. The war he started, it ended with him alone, and the temple he trapped himself in became someone else's training ground. If Exar Kun had lived longer, maybe he could have course-corrected, maybe he would have matured, chilled out a bit, actually started shaping the Sith into something coherent. But instead, he tried to speedrun galactic conquest at 25 and ended up haunting his own mistakes for eternity. And maybe that's the real lesson with him. Power without patience goes nowhere. So yeah, Exar Kun's story is loud and full of wild Force tricks. But at the end of the day, he didn't shape the future. He didn't elevate the Sith. He just burned out and then refused to let go. And that's why, no matter how cool he looks or how many lightsaber flips he pulled off, he stays locked below the top tier. He had everything, and still managed to become a ghost in his own story. So if you've never heard of Darth Tenebrous, don't worry. He's not exactly front-page material in the Sith newspaper. You won't find him in most games. He's barely mentioned in movies, but make no mistake, this guy matters. Not because of what he conquered, but because of what he started. Tenebrous was the Sith Master who trained Darth Plagueis. So in a way, this is the guy who built the engine that eventually wrecked the galaxy. And that's honestly the best way to describe him. He wasn't the driver. He was the one who designed the machine. This guy was all about efficiency, precision. He saw the Sith not as a religion or a cult or a brotherhood, but as a long-term investment, a slow-moving project to perfect the manipulation of life, death, power, and reality itself. The rule of two? That was just step one. He was a Bith, which again sounds funny at first until you realize their brains are ridiculously advanced, like genius level. Every Bith is basically born with the hardware to outcalculate a droid. So Tenebrous applied that to the dark side, and what you end up with is a Sith Lord who approached evil like it was a math problem. And his biggest obsession? Immortality. Not in the mythological, become a god kind of way. He didn't want to merge with the Force like Qui-Gon. He didn't want to live on as a ghost like Exar Kun. That wasn't his thing. Tenebrous wanted practical, physical, biological immortality. He wanted to fix death the way an engineer fixes a broken part. He studied viruses, genetics, microscopic life forms, and not just in theory. He started building Force-powered biological experiments. Imagine the most unethical mad scientist you can think of. Now give him Sith powers and tell him he can do whatever he wants. That was Tenebrous. And his apprentice, Darth Plagueis. Plagueis wasn't a mistake. He was handpicked by Tenebrous to be the next link in the chain, someone who could continue his work. Tenebrous believed the key to Sith immortality would come not just from his own research, but from a long chain of brilliant Sith Lords slowly building on each other's findings. Think of it like a twisted science project being passed down over generations, each Sith Lord pushing the experiment a little further. But here's where Tenebrous completely miscalculated, and this is where it gets kind of funny, in a dark way. He trained Plagueis perfectly, too perfectly. He gave him all the tools, all the freedom, all the trust, and then Plagueis killed him. Not out of passion, not in some lightsaber duel screaming, "I hate you," like Anakin and Obi-Wan. Plagueis killed Tenebrous like someone taking out the trash, calm, efficient, and fully expected. See, he had this theory that if he could be killed under the right conditions, his consciousness could survive in the Force and return later. Kind of like Force ghosting, but darker, creepier, less peaceful monk, more parasitic energy blob. So in his final moments, after Plagueis struck him down, Tenebrous tries to do exactly that. He tries to leap forward in time, riding the Force like a wave, to remanifest in a future host. And it actually kind of works. His consciousness survives, but not in the way he expected. Instead of returning in glory and taking over a new body, Tenebrous finds himself trapped, just a lingering awareness stuck in the Force, forced to watch the galaxy unfold around him. In that state, he becomes hyper-aware. He sees everything, every future, every branching timeline, every mistake Plagueis is about to make. He sees that Plagueis will create life, will try to manipulate midichlorians, will take on an apprentice named Sidious, and that he, not Tenebrous, will be the last useful link in the chain. He watches as Plagueis builds the very future Tenebrous wanted, without him, and he hates it. Imagine being trapped in ghost mode limbo, while the apprentice you trained gets all the glory, builds everything you dreamed of, takes the work further, and never once looks back. He was cold, he was brilliant, and he understood the dark side like a surgeon understands anatomy. But in the end, he was still outplayed by his own student. Now, he is not alive and not dead, just conscious, drifting. He could see everything, the galaxy, the future, the paths ahead, but he couldn't do anything. He was watching it all unfold without being part of it, like being locked behind glass while the world kept moving. And this is where it gets interesting, because Tenebrous starts to realize how wrong he was. He thought the Sith path forward was all about control. Cold logic, long-term planning. He trained Plagueis to follow that vision. He expected the Sith would become stronger through discipline and intelligence, one apprentice at a time, slowly mastering life and death. But what he sees from his little Force prison is something else entirely. He watches as Plagueis gets obsessed with midichlorians, starts manipulating life itself, and comes close to creating life. And then, Plagueis gets killed by his own apprentice, not with respect, not as a passing of the torch, but because Sidious saw no value in continuing the chain. Palpatine wasn't interested in refining the Sith over generations. He was interested in owning it all himself. Tenebrous had spent his entire life believing the Sith were a system, something that could evolve slowly and precisely. And suddenly here comes Sidious, throwing all that in the trash and replacing it with raw manipulation and brute force. And it works. Tenebrous has to sit there and watch as the guy 2 generations down the line wipes out the Jedi, turns the Republic into an empire, and dominates the galaxy. Not by following some perfect Sith plan, but by breaking all the rules. It's frustrating to him, because he realizes that the Sith weren't held back by a lack of intelligence. They were held back by people like him, who thought you could program the dark side like it was a machine. Tenebrous thought the future would be written in formulas and rituals, but the galaxy didn't reward control. It rewarded audacity. Palpatine understood that people are emotional, unpredictable, and easy to steer when you lean into fear, desire, and ambition. Tenebrous, for all his mental ability, didn't get that. He saw the dark side as a tool. Sidious saw it as a weapon, one to be wielded, not studied under a microscope. So, alright, let's talk about Marka Ragnos, the name that shows up in all the ancient Sith history books, gets whispered about in dark temples, and sounds like the kind of guy who should have had a whole Disney Plus miniseries by now. And yet, somehow nobody really knows what he did. Seriously, ask someone to name 3 things he accomplished. They'll say, well, he ruled for 100 years, and then just kind of nod like that alone should be enough to blow your mind. And to be fair, in Sith history, that kind of is a flex. These people drop like flies. So let's start there. Longevity. Marka Ragnos ruled the Sith Empire, the old Sith Empire, way before the rule of 2, for nearly a century. That's not a typo. 100 years. The man just stayed on the throne, which, when you're dealing with an entire culture full of backstabbing, egomaniac dark side users, is impressive in itself. Like, imagine being the king of a nation, where literally everyone under you is trying to kill you to take your job, and not only do they fail, they don't even try after a while. That's power. But here's the part that throws people off. We don't have a ton of details about how he ruled. You'd think a guy with that much time in power would have a long list of galactic takeovers, massive wars, or monuments, with his face carved into moons. But with Ragnos, not really. He didn't launch massive crusades. He wasn't out there force-choking star systems into submission. He didn't burn down Jedi temples every other week. Most of the time, he just sat on the throne and kept things from falling apart. And honestly, that might be his biggest achievement, because ancient Sith politics were a disaster. You had pure-blood Sith, actual red-skinned, born into its Sith species, and then all these exiled Dark Jedi who joined their ranks after getting kicked out of the Jedi Order for doing spooky Force stuff. Total cultural clash, constant tension, different traditions, different hierarchies, everyone paranoid that the guy next to them was planning a coup. It was a Force-sensitive powder keg, and Marka Ragnos somehow kept it all under control. For a century. He didn't unify the galaxy, he didn't defeat the Jedi in some massive victory, but he held the Sith Empire together at a time when it probably should have exploded from the inside. That doesn't sound flashy, but that's the kind of leadership that actually matters. He wasn't the most creative Sith, he wasn't the most ambitious, but he was the guy who could stare down an entire room of Force-empowered egos and keep them in line. The guy had presence. And I'm not talking about Force aura or some mystical sorcery glow. I mean the kind of presence where you walk into a room and people shut up. He wasn't known for being chatty. Most Sith Lords who came after him described him more like a force of nature than a man. Nobody called him wise. Nobody called him charming. They called him terrifying. And that was enough. And yeah, he did have power. Legitimate, ancient, weird, old-school Sith power. This wasn't force choke and call it a day level ability. We're talking Sith alchemy, sorcery, rituals, all that creepy temple magic stuff. He probably knew more about the dark side than half the future Sith combined. He might not have used it every day, but he definitely could. If Ragnos decided someone had to die, it wasn't a duel. It was more like a curse. You'd just start aging weird or coughing up shadows. And that was that. But maybe the most interesting thing about his rule is how little blood there was. Not none, obviously. This was still the Sith Empire. There were definitely some vaporized apprentices along the way. But Ragnos didn't run his empire like a slasher movie. He wasn't insecure. He didn't need to constantly prove he was the baddest guy in the room. Everyone just knew. That was the vibe. And honestly, that might be more terrifying than lightning fingers. What's wild is how the entire Sith power structure basically revolved around his existence. He dies, instant civil war. All these pretenders show up. Naga Sadow, Ludo Kresh, a bunch of other guys with names that sound like Star Wars salad dressing. And suddenly the whole thing Ragnos held together for 100 years collapses into chaos. That tells you something, right? This wasn't a functioning empire. It was Ragnos holding it all up by sheer willpower. And here's where it gets interesting. His death didn't only trigger a power struggle, it defined the Sith path forward. Every future Sith looked back at him like this mythical figure, even in the time of Exar Kun and Ulic Qel-Droma, thousands of years later. Sith were still hearing his ghost speak in temples, still quoting his teachings, still using his mask and tomb like some creepy intergalactic church. Marka Ragnos dies, and almost instantly, two of his top lieutenants, Naga Sadow and Ludo Kresh, are at each other's throats trying to grab the throne. And it's not just a quiet disagreement either. It's a full-on Sith civil war, explosions, betrayals, invasions, the whole dark side soap opera package. Which leads to the real question here. If Ragnos was such a strong leader, how come nobody knew what to do after he was gone? Because that's the weird part. For a guy who ruled so long, there's almost no evidence of a clear structure, successor, or plan. Like, you'd expect some kind of council, right? Or maybe an heir, legacy, or a vision. Nope, just Ghost Marka, watching from the afterlife like, you all are messing this up immediately. That's the first big knock against him. See, some Sith are remembered because they reshaped the galaxy, others because they reshaped the Sith. Ragnos did neither. His empire didn't grow. His teachings weren't revolutionary. He wasn't the father of some brilliant new Sith philosophy. What he did was survive, and while that's impressive, it's not transformational. Even his most loyal followers didn't seem to agree on what he stood for. Naga Sadow wanted to expand the Sith Empire aggressively. Ludo Kresh wanted to play it safe and keep the status quo, and both claimed they were following Ragnos' vision, which tells you, maybe there wasn't a clear vision at all. Now, let's talk about his ghost phase, because yes, this man was apparently so Sithy that death couldn't even stop him from meddling. Ragnos shows up as a spirit after death more often than he did when he was alive. He appears to Exar Kun and Ulic Qel-Droma, blesses them with dark side power, and basically says, go be the next big thing. And even then, it's weirdly vague. He doesn't pass on ancient wisdom. He doesn't say, here's how to fix the Sith. He's just like, hey, you seem angry. Want to go ruin some Jedi? So now, thousands of years after his death, Marka Ragnos has become this weird mascot for ancient Sith tradition. His tomb gets used for dark rituals. His mask is a cursed relic. His name gets dropped in spooky ruins whenever someone wants to sound important. But the truth is, that myth matters more than the man ever did. Like, ask yourself this. If Marka Ragnos never came back as a ghost, would anyone still be talking about him? Because his reign didn't lead to any major Sith golden age. The Sith Empire fell apart right after him. His teachings weren't preserved. His students didn't go on to become legends. He was like the last plug holding a dam together. Once he was gone, the whole thing collapsed. And you know what that feels like? A wasted opportunity. If you've got the power to keep a chaotic Sith Empire stable for 100 years, and you don't use that time to build something sustainable, no doctrine, no structure, no future, that's not a legacy. That's just temporary control. It's the equivalent of holding your breath during an argument and calling that winning. And the fact that future Sith had to keep digging up his tomb to try and squeeze out some leftover wisdom, that says a lot too. He didn't leave them with anything functional, just spooky vibes and a creepy Force echo. He's like that one grandparent everyone remembers as stern but can't tell you a single story about. Which brings us to the main reason he doesn't climb higher on this ranking. He didn't push the Sith forward. He didn't elevate them. He didn't change the game. He didn't leave a system better than he found it. He just kept it from exploding for a while. And the moment he was gone, everything blew up anyway. So yes, Ragnos earns respect for lasting, for being the big dog no one dared to challenge for an entire century. That's a level of dominance we can't ignore. But he doesn't break into the upper echelon, because when it comes to the actual legacy test, what did you leave behind? Who did you shape? How did you evolve the Sith? The answers are, not much, nobody, and you didn't. If you ever wondered what happens when a Jedi watches the Republic fall apart, sees the Clone Wars wreck the galaxy, and doesn't die, the answer is they turn into Darth Krayt. He was born Asherad Het, a Jedi Knight raised among Tatooine's Tusken Raiders. So from the beginning, this guy wasn't exactly traditional. He didn't grow up on Coruscant eating protein cubes and meditating in temples. He was riding banthas in the desert, learning tribal codes alongside Jedi values. Then came the Clone Wars, and like every Jedi, he got pulled into the mess. He fought and he survived. He made it through General Grievous, droid armies, separatist backstabbing, and just when he thought it was over, Order 66 dropped. The clones turned on him. The Jedi were wiped out, the galaxy collapsed into Imperial control, and he barely made it out alive. He ran back to Tatooine to hide, dropped the whole Jedi identity, and became a warlord again. Full Tusken, face wrap, gaffy stick, the whole vibe, until Obi-Wan Kenobi found him. They had a quick little desert throwdown, as you do, and Obi-Wan beat him and told him to cut the nonsense. And Krayt, or Het at the time, listened. Sort of. He left Tatooine, but now he had no temple, no Jedi Order, and no purpose. He was wandering through a galaxy that had erased everything he'd trained his whole life to protect. And that's when things got weird. He ends up captured by the Yuuzhan Vong, alien invaders who basically worship pain, grow living weapons, and see machines as blasphemy. They tortured him, experimented on him, infused his body with organic implants that slowly started killing him. And he survived that too, but not unchanged. When he finally escaped, the guy who came out wasn't really a Sharad Het anymore. He was something else. Broken, reshaped, obsessed with restoring balance. By any means necessary. And what's the fastest path to absolute control in Star Wars? You guessed it. Become a Sith. So he takes the name Darth Krayt, builds his own Sith order called the One Sith, and declares the old ways obsolete. No more rule of two, no more slow apprenticeships, no more secrecy, just one vision, one master, one Sith army, all linked under him like a hive of red lightsaber-wielding believers. His goal? Bring order to the galaxy, not destroy it, not conquer it for fun, but actually fix it through total domination. And weirdly, he almost pulls it off. He rises up, overthrows the Galactic Alliance, and takes the throne as Emperor over a new empire. Jedi scattered, Republic in ruins, Sith ruling openly again. It's not just a win, it's a statement. The rule of two is dead. Krayt is the future, except of course, his body is falling apart. The Yuuzhan Vong implants are slowly killing him from the inside. Every minute he's rotting beneath that armor. He's using Sith alchemy, cybernetics, and force healing just to stay functional. He starts obsessing over immortality, over restoring his strength, and, just like Plagueis before him, he starts slipping into madness. Eventually, he gets betrayed by his own Sith, classic, and thrown into stasis. But Krayt doesn't die. He comes back, stronger, crazier. He literally rises from the grave like a Sith zombie and says, "I'm not done yet." And that second version of Krayt, way less patient. He's done pretending to be a savior. He wants total obedience. The galaxy either falls in line or it burns. But by then, his message is hollow. His own Sith are turning on each other. The Jedi are rallying. His control is slipping. Because for all his speeches about order and unity, he never figured out the one thing that keeps an empire stable: loyalty. Not fear, not rituals, not shared red armor, actual belief. And nobody really believed in Krayt, not even most of his own Sith. Eventually, he's defeated for good. Not by some chosen one, not by prophecy, but by his own failure to build anything sustainable. Just like a lot of Sith, honestly. He confused fear for loyalty, control for structure, and power for leadership. So where does that leave him? Krayt was powerful, no question. He survived more than almost any Sith. He built a whole new order from nothing. Took over the galaxy twice. That's impressive. But at the end of the day, he ruled alone. Not because no one else could stand beside him, but because he never trusted anyone to. That's why Darth Krayt lands where he does. Strong, ambitious, smart enough to break the rules, but not stable enough to build something that lasted. A survivor, a reformer, a warlord, and in the end, just another Sith who couldn't let go of control. So imagine this. You're a Sith warrior in the Old Republic, just a foot soldier in the endless Jedi-Sith wars. You fight, you lose, you bleed, and eventually you die. That's the end of your story, unless you're Darth Sion. This dude actually dies, and then says, "Not today." He reaches out with the Force and just holds himself together through pure hate. Every crack in his body, every injury, every snapped bone, he glues it all back with anger. Pain becomes the thing keeping him alive, literally. And not just once, this becomes his whole life. He gets cut down in battle again. He wakes up, blown apart. He pulls himself back together. He turns pain into his identity, so much so that he ends up looking like a broken statue that someone tried to reassemble without the manual. Now, here's the weird thing. This actually makes him incredibly powerful. Because if you can't die and you're not afraid of death, you fight differently. You don't dodge, you don't play defense, you just walk through everything. Most Jedi were terrified of him not because of his strength, but because nothing they did seemed to matter. He just kept coming. But here's the catch, and it's a big one. Sion isn't immortal because he found some secret ritual or did some brilliant experiment. He's immortal because he refuses to let go. His entire existence is pain, and if he stops hurting, he stops existing. That's addiction, and the Force, being what it is, doesn't give you that kind of ability for free. It costs him everything. He can't rest, he can't relax. He's stuck in this permanent feedback loop of hate and agony, all because he's terrified of disappearing. It's honestly kind of miserable, and deep down, he knows it. That's why when you meet him in Knights of the Old Republic 2, you can tell he's not this cool, composed Sith Lord like Revan or Malak. He's tired. He talks a big game, sure, but his voice is always strained. His movements are slow. His philosophy basically boils down to, life is pain, and the strong survive by embracing it. It's not exactly inspirational. He ends up joining Darth Traya, another ex-Jedi turned Sith, who's more focused on big ideas. She sees in him the raw power of pain, and he sees in her something like direction, maybe even purpose, but the relationship is toxic. She manipulates him. He obeys her, but resents it. He wants to be more, but he can't be more, because he never built anything for himself. Just survival, that's all he knows, and eventually he breaks away. But what does he do with that freedom? He doesn't create a new Sith movement. He doesn't train a successor. He just continues the cycle, wandering, killing, hurting, staying alive through rage. When the player character in KOTOR 2 finally confronts him, it's not really a boss fight, it's a conversation, because Sion's whole existence is tied to one idea, that pain is strength, and if you convince him otherwise, he starts to lose that belief, and when that belief fades, so does the power keeping him alive. He just lets go. Before there were Sith Lords, before Darth anything, Ajunta Pall was a Jedi. And not just a random Padawan, either. He was a respected Jedi Master. Talented, curious, maybe too curious. Because here's what made him different. He wasn't content with just using the Force. He wanted to understand it. Especially the stuff the Jedi kept in the don't touch drawer. The dark side, the emotions, the powers you weren't supposed to even think about. He studied alchemy. Tried to use the Force to alter life itself. Create new forms, new weapons, new power. The Jedi Council told him to stop, multiple times. But Pall wasn't the kind of guy to drop a project halfway through. He believed knowledge shouldn't be off limits. He believed the Force was more than just a code to follow. It was a tool to be shaped. Eventually, the Council had enough. He got exiled, along with a handful of other, like-minded Jedi. And this group of Force-using outcasts became known as the Dark Jedi. That's where the split began. And that exile, it didn't break him, it freed him. Pall and the others found their way to the planet Korriban, home to a species also called the Sith, red-skinned, Force-sensitive, and tribal. When the Dark Jedi showed up with their advanced knowledge and powers, the native Sith basically went, yeah, these guys are gods now. And just like that, the Sith Lords were born. Ajunta Pall became the first. He took the bitterness from being cast out, the obsession with forbidden knowledge, and the desire to shape the galaxy instead of just serve it, and turned it into something that would outlive him by thousands of years. The rule of two, Darth Bane, Palpatine, all of it. They only exist because Ajunta Pall walked out first. But here's where it gets interesting, because his story doesn't end with power and domination. At the height of his influence, Ajunta wasn't just feared, he was haunted. He had built something massive, started a whole legacy of dark side dominance, but it wasn't bringing him peace. It wasn't giving him what he thought it would. Somewhere deep down, he knew he'd lost something important when he turned his back on the Jedi, and that regret never really left him. In KOTOR, when you find his tomb on Korriban, you don't fight some raging monster or corrupted spirit. You meet a sad man, a ghost who remembers what he did and wishes he hadn't. He talks about how the dark side twisted him, how it consumed the others, how it all spiraled out of control, and how even after death, he doesn't really know if he was right. That's what makes Ajunta Pall so unique. He's not terrifying like other ones, not political like Sidious, not scientific like Tenebrous. He's just human. So where does he land? He's not up there in terms of power. He didn't destroy planets, he didn't create empires, but in terms of influence, he's top tier. So Ajunta Pall earns his place not because he won the war, but because he started it. And even if he regretted it in the end, there's no denying, once he turned away from the Jedi, the galaxy was never the same again. So if we're building a timeline of old school, ancient Sith, Naga Sadow sits somewhere in that chaotic golden age, when the Sith Empire wasn't a hidden cult or a pair of whispering weirdos in hoods. It was a full-on civilization. Red-skinned Sith species, giant temples, fleets, empires, and Sadow, he wanted more. At the time, the Sith Empire was ruled by a bunch of traditionalist types, conservative, careful, focused on keeping their power intact. Sadow hated that. He thought the Sith were wasting their potential, sitting on their ancient throne world doing nothing. He believed they should expand, conquer, spread their rule across the stars, starting with the Republic. Basically, while the rest of the council was saying, maybe we should chill, Sadow was saying, have you seen how many ships we have? But the others didn't agree with him. And he knew he wasn't going to rise to the top by waiting politely for a promotion. So, in true Sith fashion, he staged some chaos to speed things up. And I mean real chaos. He faked a Republic attack on the Sith Empire, full-on illusion magic, forged evidence, even a staged prison break. All of it just to whip the Sith population into war mode. It worked. The council panicked. Everyone started shouting about revenge, and Sadow rose up as the strong, aggressive leader who would protect them from the Republic. Boom, he's in charge. And what's the first thing he does as newly crowned Dark Lord of the Sith? Launches a full-scale invasion of the Republic. Massive fleets, Sith battle meditation, illusion-based warfare. It was like watching a magician with a death wish. Here's the thing though, it almost worked. Sadow had powerful abilities in Sith alchemy and illusion. Basically, he could make you believe your fleet was surrounded when you were actually alone. He weaponized fear, he confused commanders, he used ancient rituals and weird magic tech to pull off some real damage. But he wasn't subtle, and he definitely wasn't good at long-term thinking. The Republic pushed back, hard. Jedi rallied, systems turned on him, and even within his own Sith Empire, people started questioning if this guy actually knew what he was doing. And to be honest, he kind of didn't. See, Sadow was great at starting wars, he was terrible at finishing them. He didn't have the political skill to hold the Empire together once things got messy. He didn't have a backup plan. And eventually, after a series of embarrassing defeats and betrayals, his own people turned on him. He fled. Not with an army, not with a grand retreat. He just took off with a handful of followers and hid on Yavin 4, the same jungle moon the Rebel Alliance would use thousands of years later. And that's where he stayed, isolated, alone, experimenting with Sith alchemy in temples while the rest of the galaxy forgot he even existed. He was basically the ancient Sith version of a washed-up general living in the woods, yelling at trees. In some versions of the story, he trains one last apprentice. In others, he just fades into legend. But either way, Naga Sadow ends his story in exile. Not as a ruler, not as a conqueror, just a guy who played the big move and lost it all. Well, he definitely shaped Sith history. He proved the Sith could be more than just backroom schemers. He reminded the galaxy that the dark side could be loud, destructive, and overwhelming. That mattered, but the trade-off? He was impulsive. He let ambition run the show, and the fallout from his war basically doomed the ancient Sith Empire. They never fully recovered. He triggered what would eventually become centuries of collapse and fragmentation. Naga Sadow was a spark, a big one, but not a stable flame. He belongs in the history books because of how big he went, but not near the top, because power without control never lasts. And Sadow, he had no idea how to stop once things got loud. Alright, let's talk about Count Dooku, aka Darth Tyrannus, probably one of the classiest Sith Lords you'll come across. Picture a tall, poised aristocrat who's got this smooth, commanding presence, and yeah, he's just dripping with that "I'm better than you" vibe. But beneath the fancy robes and calm demeanour, there's a Sith who played the long game with politics, manipulation, and of course, lightsabers. Dooku's story starts with the Jedi Order. This guy wasn't just any Jedi, he was trained by Yoda himself. Imagine that, one of the greatest Jedi Masters, personally mentoring Dooku. So, he had all the knowledge and power to be one of the Order's shining stars. The Jedi Council, the Republic, the whole system felt broken. Slow-moving, stuck in old traditions, and blind to the corruption eating away at the galaxy. At some point, Dooku decided enough was enough. He left the Jedi Order. That wasn't a quiet walk away and disappear kind of leave. No, he left with a bang, calling out the Jedi for their hypocrisy and failings. It's like he looked at the Jedi Code, flipped it off and said, "I'm gonna do this my way." And that's pretty much the moment he started heading down the path to the dark side. Enter Darth Sidious, the master manipulator who spots a golden opportunity in Dooku's disillusionment. Sidious needs someone with influence, power, and a way into the political systems of the Republic. Dooku fits the bill perfectly. He's not just a Force user, he's a respected noble and senator from the planet Sereno. This means he already has political clout and connections, which Sidious can exploit. Once Dooku becomes Darth Tyrannus, he's not just a Sith assassin or dark sorcerer, he's the architect of the Clone Wars. This guy doesn't just swing a lightsaber, he pulls strings like a seasoned politician. He helps engineer the galaxy-wide conflict that tears the Republic apart, the war that sets the stage for Sidious's rise to Emperor. What makes Dooku stand out from other Sith Lords is how he combines his combat prowess with a real talent for diplomacy and intrigue. He's like the chess master of the dark side. Dooku is on the front lines of galactic politics, convincing systems to join the separatists and keeping the war going. And he's good at it. His lightsaber skills are top-notch too, graceful, precise and deadly. He duels like he's dancing, which makes sense because he was trained in Makashi, a lightsaber form designed for elegant dueling. Watching him fight is like watching a master swordsman glide through battle, always one step ahead. But, and here's the kicker, Dooku's biggest flaw is his arrogance. He thinks he's the smartest guy in the room. He underestimates Anakin Skywalker, the hot-headed Padawan who eventually kills him. He underestimates Sidious, who's been playing him all along. And that arrogance, it's classic Sith downfall material. Dooku thinks he's running the show, but really, he's just another piece on Sidious's board. When the time comes, Sidious cuts him loose, ordering Anakin to kill him and clear the path for Vader's rise. It's brutal, but it's Sith politics. So what's the takeaway? Dooku is one of the most complex Sith Lords because he's not just a power-hungry brute or a mysterious shadow. He's a nobleman who lost faith in the Republic and the Jedi, and who genuinely believes that a new order, even if it means war and chaos, is the only way forward. But his story also shows the dark side's biggest truth. No matter how powerful or smart you are, the Sith are all just waiting to stab each other in the back. Dooku's life ends as a pawn, betrayed by his master and killed by his apprentice. Not the ending a guy with his ego wanted, but a very Sith-like finale. You know the guy, red and black face tattoos, horns like a devil, and that unforgettable double-bladed lightsaber that basically redefined what a lightsaber duel could look like. Maul's entrance in The Phantom Menace was electric, even if he didn't get a ton of screen time or dialogue. Here's the thing, Maul wasn't built to be a philosopher or a Sith mastermind. He was designed to be a weapon, straight up. Sidious took a kid from Dathomir, a planet known for its dark side magic and harsh environment, and trained him in brutal ways to become the perfect assassin. No distractions, no second guessing, just pure focus on killing Jedi and doing whatever Sidious ordered. And Sidious succeeded. Maul is lightning fast, aggressive, and brutal. His style is almost animalistic, like a predator stalking prey. Lightning reflexes, and precision strikes. That duel in The Phantom Menace with Obi-Wan and Qui-Gon? Legendary. It's one of the most iconic Star Wars fights ever, and Maul's double-bladed saber was a game-changer. It showed us something new and exciting, and gave the dark side a terrifying new face. But then, in a brutal twist, Maul gets cut in half by Obi-Wan and falls down a reactor shaft. Most characters in his position would be dead, gone, and forgotten. Here's where Maul's story gets really interesting. He doesn't just die. Somehow, fueled by sheer rage and the dark side itself, he survives, crawls out of that shaft, badly injured, but alive. He's lost his lower body, but adapts with cybernetic legs, turning himself into something even more terrifying, a Sith ghost who refuses to disappear. But with Sidious moving on, taking other apprentices like Dooku, and then Vader, Maul is cast aside. Not exactly the happy ending for your Sith apprentice, right? So what does Maul do? He carves his own path. He becomes a crime lord, building the Shadow Collective, a coalition of gangs and mercenaries. He's no longer a Sith apprentice. He's a kingpin in the galaxy's underworld, ruling through fear and respect. This chapter of Maul's life shows a different side of him. He's no longer just the silent killer. He's a cunning leader, a strategist, and a man driven by vengeance against both Obi-Wan and Sidious. His hatred simmers for decades, fueling several comebacks, betrayals, and epic showdowns. And while he's never officially Sith anymore, his dark side power remains strong. Maybe even stronger, because he's free from Sidious's control. Now, what's really fascinating about Maul is that he defies the usual Sith mold. He's not the grand schemer like Sidious, nor the aristocrat with political finesse like Dooku. He's a pure warrior, raw, intense, and relentless. And that makes him relatable in a way. Maul is the guy who was forged to be a tool, and when thrown away, he fights to create his own identity and legacy. He's tragic too, shaped by abuse, betrayal, and loss, but still refusing to give up. That makes his story compelling beyond just the action scenes. So where does that put Darth Maul on the Sith scale? He's definitely a fan favourite. His design, fighting style, and sheer persistence make him stand out. But in terms of Sith hierarchy, he's more of a dangerous wildcard, powerful, but ultimately sidelined by bigger players. Still, his impact on the Star Wars saga is huge. He changed how Sith apprentices were seen, showed the power of the dark side in combat, and proved that sometimes it's not about the throne, it's about survival and revenge.